Hi, everybody. I will now call to order tonight's meeting of the Evanston Preservation Commission. We have a quorum of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 commissioners present. Great. The City of Evanston's Preservation Commission empowers this body to oversee and administer the community's historic preservation program. During our monthly public meetings, we encourage public participation, afford due process through public hearings on proposed landmark designations and applications for certificates of appropriateness, and discuss ways to advance long-range planning goals beyond case review. We ask anyone who wishes to address the Commission to sign in and indicate the discussion item, designation, or application to be addressed. The first order of business tonight will be public comment, typically on items listed under discussion on the meeting agenda. For old and new business, I will ask staff to read each case into the record. Once the case has been read into the record, the applicant presents an overview of the proposal, including evidence and testimony that support the applicable review standards being met. Commissioners will then ask questions of the applicant. Following the questioning period, members of the public may speak toward the application, keeping their comments to 3 minutes or less. Following public comment, the applicant will have the opportunity to respond to any evidence or testimony against the application as it relates to the review standards. The Commission then closes the record and proceeds to deliberation and a motion to approve the proposal or approve with conditions. A simple majority of the quorum present is required for a motion to carry. After old and new business conclude, the Commission considers the previous public meeting's minutes and then discusses actions pertaining to long-range planning goals. Okay. We are going to start with public comment. I think we can go ahead and have 3 minutes per person. Unfortunately, the timer is not working, right, yet? Still not working. The timer is not working there, so we're going to time everyone here. We'll give you kind of a wave or something if you have 30 seconds, when you have 30 seconds left. But if you'd like to put a timer on your phone so that you have it counting down in front of you, you're welcome to do that as well. Who is the first person on the list? We have Steve Test first up. When you come, please make sure that you are at the podium speaking into the microphone because it is being recorded. So we need that for the public testimony. And if you could just say your name, please.
Okay. Steve Test, 1135 Hinman Avenue. I'm here to oppose the proposed M3 zoning of the parcels on Chicago Avenue between Lee Street and Dempster Street. I know you're going to be talking about zoning later. M3 is particularly inappropriate for the east side of Chicago Avenue in those 3 blocks, all of which are directly adjacent to a neighborhood zoned R1. I've studied the proposed Envision Evanston 2045 zoning map, and I can find no other instance of M3 districts with a maximum building height of 100 feet directly adjacent to R1 districts. This is the only 3 blocks in the whole city where that condition occurs in this proposed zoning. The fact that these 3 blocks of proposed M3 are just across an alley from an R1 zoned historic district make that even worse. The proposed M3 zoning of these 3 blocks of Chicago Avenue is uniquely inappropriate and must be rejected. Once the M3 zoning proposal is off the table, then discussions can start about what is the proper zoning for this section of Chicago Avenue. Thanks.
Thank you very much. The next person to speak is Jeff Wooten. Wooten.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Jeff Wooten, 1028 Hinman Avenue. And basically I have very similar comments. You've heard it. I'll save you the repetition. But basically, we applaud the work of the Preservation Commission. We like what's in the Preserve 2040 plan. Disappointed that it wasn't even, at least that I saw, referenced in Envision 2045. And in particular, Initiative 2.5 of the Preserve 2040 recognizes the redevelopment potential of Chicago Avenue and calls for sensitivity in the transition. We're in the Lakeshore Historic District and going directly from a 35-foot height to a 100-foot building that would be 70 feet outside my back, the windows of the back of my house is not a sensitive transition, in our opinion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then we have Michael Davis.
Michael Davis, 1109 Hinman Avenue. Chicago Avenue from Howard Street to Lake Street forms the western perimeter of the Third Ward, which encompasses most of Evanston's historic district, the Lakeshore Historic District, as you well know. I'm speaking for the overwhelming majority of homeowners on the 3 blocks of Hinman Avenue from Lee Street to Dempster Street. Like all our neighbors in the historic district, we cannot make a single external alteration to our homes without written approval from you, the Preservation Commission, whether it's changing a window or replacing the siding or anything else. That is why when we found out just a few weeks ago that the city's new long-range plan will dramatically change the look of the historic district where we live, we, 80 homeowners representing 45 homes, came together like never before. I've lived here for 13 years and I've never signed a petition or met with my neighbors all at once or had so many substantive conversations. We have significant concerns about the process. Almost all the dozens of people I reached out to on my block at holiday parties a few weeks ago and in casual conversations on the street had never heard of Envision Evanston before I told them, and others report the same. We received a small legal notice around Thanksgiving, the kind we routinely get when a neighbor enlarges the window, and the plan itself, as you know, was only fully released late on New Year's Eve. It was only a massive citywide public outcry that forced the city council to slow down what was being rushed through. And this extension has given us the time to study the plan and learn about its many gaps. We are grateful to you, the commissioners of the Preservation Commission, for speaking out in defense of the City of Evanston's 58-page, 20-year plan, Preserve 2040, adopted unanimously by the City Council some 2 years ago, which, as you noted, was, quote, made by Evanston for Evanston. I would like to draw your attention to the letter you wrote to the Land Use Commission following your December 14th, 2024 meeting, in which you say, quote, the Preservation Commission believes a comprehensive plan is meant to represent the community's consensus and vision for the future, close quote. One of the value statements guiding Preserve 2040 is, quote, preservation contributes to vibrant, human-scaled environments. I want to concur with what Jeff Wooten said and what Steve Test just said, and to add that we do not believe that a 100-foot-high urban canyon abutting and looming over the historic district matches this value of the Preservation Commission. We have invested our resources and time in maintaining and cultivating the historic district in our mind for generations to come. We call on you to take a leadership role in protecting the work we have done under your guidance from the reckless, ill-conceived, rushed development of Chicago Avenue between Lee Street and Dempster Street as conceived by Evanston 2045 in its current draft form. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right on time, right 3 minutes on the dot. Is there anyone else that is not signed up? Oh, I'm sorry. There is one other person, Jim McKee. Yes.
Okay, so I practiced, and I think I can get it in 3 minutes, but I have to talk fast. So, my name is Jim McKee, Third Ward resident, and I just want to say that I love old houses and old apartment buildings. I think they give Evanston charm and grace. Restoring these is my line of work. I oppose the portions of the Envision Evanston plan that will result in tear down and demolition of our older homes, all in the misguided hope that this will somehow result in more affordable housing in Evanston. I hope that this commission will agree and go on record in opposition as well. Now, maybe you don't feel it's your commission's job to weigh in on the economics of development of affordable housing, but I think we can all agree that and effect of this plan will clearly be to increase the numbers of tear downs, either A, to build new 2 to 4 unit structures that will be almost lot line to lot line and greatly affect the architectural cohesiveness of our residential blocks and neighborhoods, or B, to construct new single family homes that can be up to 40% larger than previously allowed. In my opinion, this is just an open invitation to developers to come tear down small houses and build cookie cutter starter McMansions, the likes of which can be seen all around Wilmette and other suburbs like Park Ridge that are also friendly to tear down redevelopment. But Evanston has a lot more historical charm than these cities. Why would we want to copy them? I also want to tell you about my personal history. I lived in Rogers Park for over 20 years. Before moving to Evanston. The history there is that there was a massive upzoning around 1960, which allowed developers to buy single-family homes on large lots there, tear them down, and put up apartment buildings. That was done on a huge scale. Hundreds of homes were torn down, and the character of the neighbor changed completely. The overall effect was and is that Rogers Park feels very poorly planned with no cohesiveness, not to mention a terrible parking shortage due to all the increased density there. Although my wife and I had a beautiful home that I had restored in Rogers Park, when it came time for us to look at schools and think about where we wanted to raise our kids, we decided to move to Evanston as that was what we really wanted. We found a modest fixer-upper home in a great neighborhood we were fortunate enough to buy in 2006. And now, after many years of sweat equity, we have a beautiful home we've raised our 2 kids there. But I have to say that if our home were to have come on the market in the condition it was in then, with these new proposed zoning rules, it would have certainly been a tear down, and I think that's wrong. So again, my goal here is to ask you to please consider taking a position as a commission on what these zoning changes will mean for our preservation efforts and for the character and cohesiveness of our R1 and R2 neighborhoods, both because of the plan to eliminate single-family zoning and just as significantly because of the plan to raise density by 40% more than is allowed. And then I have one question I want to ask, if you're able to address. Neighbors ask me, could you confirm what protections are offered by being in a historic district? My understanding is there's no protection against demolition of a home in a historic district unless that home is landmarked. But I could be wrong. After tear down, my understanding is the commission would be charged with ensuring that the new construction would meet some level of historical appropriateness. But could you please clarify how that would work? Thank you.
So we are at our time. We can talk about these kinds of things during our discussion period. Is there anyone else who has not signed up who would like to speak? Is there anyone that signed up online? Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you very much for that comment. We will move on to old business. 1314 Judson Avenue, Lakeshore Historic District 24, Pres 0170. Could staff please read this into the record?
Case number 24 PRES 0170, 1314 Judson Avenue in the Lakeshore Historic District. Jeannie Petrick, architect and applicant on behalf of the property owner, submits for a certificate of appropriateness to raise the ceiling height and alter the roof form of an existing 2-story addition to the structure's south elevation, alter the home's pattern of fenestration, including replacement windows and existing and new openings, and truncating the existing volume and roof of a rear elevation screen porch. This case was continued at the December 10th, 2024 meeting. Applicable standards are alteration 1 through 10 and construction 1 through 8, 10 through 13, and 15.
Hi, my name is Jeannie Petrick. I am going to be commenting primarily on the comments and respond to those comments from the last meeting on December 10th. Okay. There we go. I forget, there's no pointer here, is there? Or,
I'm fine.
is this it? No, that's a sure. Okay. Oh, here it is. Perfect. Sorry. Okay. So this is the existing roof plan and footprint of the existing residence. This is the proposed changes. Actually, this should be bubbled in too as well. Sorry about that. But if we're able to scroll down to basically what I'm proposing is a hipped roof raising the walls so that the ceiling height will match the existing second floor. Currently, right now, it steps down, 2 steps down into a space with a lower shed roof. Excuse me. And so what we're proposing is to raise the ceiling height, raise the floor, so that this would match the existing second floor. The head heights of the proposed new windows, even though they're in the similar style of the original ones and similar proportions, I'm raising the head height to match the second floor head height. And then the roof line as well, the hipped roof will match, or excuse me, just the eave of it will match the existing roof eave and soffit. And then the hip roof would come lower into the primary structure, well, the back primary structure. The sill height of these windows are intentionally set at 30 inches above the floor so that we can possibly, because it's a fairly small footprint, run a desk along underneath those windows. Also in this elevation we discussed a lot about the existing screened-in porch. And what I'm proposing is that we'd still, as proposed initially, move the wall in so that we can open up this space and open up the connection of the back family room with a deck and out to the back. So that would still move from, it was approximately about here, move it over. But then the roof line, instead of just cutting it off and letting the roof be the existing roof, I'm proposing to lower the roof line and move the ridge beam over so that each side of the roof is symmetrical. So it'd be similar in idea and concept to the old one. It would just be smaller in scale. And we would salvage as much wood as we can. If you can, go to the south. So this is the south elevation. This is the existing elevation with that lower shed roof and the windows that are a little bit lower. And what I'm proposing is to raise that all and align the head heights with the second floor head height. I'm proposing to keep the existing, I don't know what to call this. It was probably like a shed roof for the first floor screened-in, or once was a screened-in porch or a sunroom, just to keep that as is, because it kind of does, as we discussed in the meeting past, it kind of breaks up that very tall vertical space. And then also in this, you can see the hip roof and where it meets with the roof beyond it, as well as as well as that little corner where there will have to be some type of cricket buildup to force the water back down to the gutter line. But that, once again, you can see the alignment of the new roof is aligned with the main existing roof. Oh, sorry, keep on doing that. Also in this, we discussed a lot about this bay window and existing mullion window that it just had, here it is, just had the transom above. And so for more sunlight into the space and for view, we're proposing just a fixed picture window instead of removing all of this like I had proposed before with a different type of window. And that is pretty much it regarding any of the changes that we discussed in December 10th.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there questions for the applicant?
Hi, because if I recall correctly, the homeowners really liked that screened-in porch and I think called it a Camp Echo,
Yeah,
right,
the
style.
yeah.
And so I appreciate the effort to keep that appearance. Is there going to be a new roof? You're moving the ridge beam, but
The ridge beam well, my hope is that they can salvage and relocate like the initial ridge beam as long as they can shore everything up and it doesn't collapse on them. I'm assuming that everything will be salvaged or as much as possible.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, in the, I guess it was a porch that you're raising the ceiling, put a new roof on. Can you tell us what the decorative treatment below the sill that's shown here would be?
Hold on, I'm not sure if I'm following you.
No,
Are you
second
ta- oh,
floor.
right
Yeah,
here.
right there.
I'm sorry. So this is and we might have the photos too, but if you look at the the south elevation, is there, in my photos, those are the ones from the preservation, I believe. Or you could can we look at the south elevation, Kate? It should be the second sheet. Oh, Lord. There it is. Okay. So this is existing. And so I'm proposing that we build upon it. And then if you look at the other elevation, the west elevation, because that shed sunroom, that office space was lower and the roof line was higher on the screen and porch, you never really see it because of the roof. So now the roof on the west side right here, this roof line is lowering. And so you will see some of that. And so I'm just matching what's on the south, that pattern.
Are those wood shingles?
No, it's almost like a decorative batten board, I would call it.
Yeah, if I could help
Thank you.
answer that
Yeah.
question. So
Okay,
I
do you
think
know?
I think you kind of did answer it. I think it's sort of a complex panel and batten system that is existing on the home.
And I would assume, because it's on the south side and then the east side of that it's probably on the west side. You just can't see it because of the roof line of the Camp Echo porch.
Did that answer? Okay. Did you have a question? Oh, did anyone else have a question for the applicant? Okay, thank you. So is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this application? Did we get anything online? Comments? Okay. All right. In that case, we will close this part of it and move to deliberation. Does anyone want to comment on it?
Yeah, I thought that it was a really great response to the comments that we had the previous meeting. I think that the new picture window in the dining room looks terrific and like it should have been there all along, if I can say that. And I like your solution for that upper office porch, raising the floor. Is that really just all that well, I know questions are over, but okay. But nice solution to that. And I like how the roof lines are now meeting the cornices and whatnot. So, I think it looks great.
Did you want to say something? Oh,
I was just going to say the same thing.
okay.
It looks great, and addresses all of our concerns.
Matthew?
I also think it looks great. I'd make the observation it's, excuse me, a little bit simpler than what we saw before. And it's interesting how the successive iterations, it's become simplified and better.
I just want to add that I think that the proportions of the porch now really feel right somehow. And it's just a feeling, so it's kind of hard to put into words. But in any case, does anyone have anything that else you'd like to say before we move to a potential, whatchamacallit? Yes, I've been doing this a couple of years. It's time for me to let someone else run these meetings. One of those. Any other comments? Okay, would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Sure.
I'll make a motion to approve. Where are we? Where is it? Oh, 24 Perez 0170 at 1314 Judson Avenue. The applicant to raise the ceiling height and alter the roof form of an existing two-story addition to the structure's south elevation, alter the home's pattern of fenestration, including replacement windows and existing and new openings, and truncating the existing volume and roof of a rear elevation screened porch. Applicable standards, alteration 1 through 10, construction 1 through 8, 10 through 13, and 15.
All right, is there a second? Seconded by Amanda. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Anyone abstain? Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Okay, next up is new business election of the 2025 officers. We have a little sheet. Thank you very much to our very, very efficient little sheet that we are going to use. And so we're just going to take a moment for those of you in the public. Every year at this time, we are obligated by our ordinance to elect officers. So we're going to go ahead and do that now, and we'll be back in touch with you in a second.
Yeah. Now that there's a second candidate for secretary, I'd like to withdraw my name from consideration.
Okay. So sorry, I should go through it. So for chair is Beth Boden and Carl Klein. Vice chair is Thomas Alleman. Alleman, thank you. And then for secretary, instead of Stuart Cohen and Amanda Ziem, it's just Amanda Ziem. So Stuart, you'd like to withdraw your name from consideration. So if everyone could just mark that out, that would be great. Sorry about that. If we could just fold them in half, and staff is going to come get them. Thank you. Okay. So thank you very much for everyone for voting. We have for Secretary Amanda Ziem, congratulations. For Vice Chair Thomas Alleman, congratulations. And for Chair Carl Klein, congratulations. Okay, so I'm going to finish out the meeting tonight, and then Carl will be running things after me. And I am smiling on the inside after all of this. Okay. Minutes. Moving on to approval of the meeting minutes. The minutes of December 12th, that was our special meeting. Do we have minutes for the monthly meeting for December as well? On the 10th? There's still. Okay. All right. So we had two meetings that week. It was our December meeting and our regular December meeting and our special meeting to talk about the comprehensive plan and draft comprehensive plan and zoning code. And our minutes for December 10th will be, we'll talk about in February. Were there any comments on the minutes for December 12th meeting?
I just want to commend staff for a very thorough summary of our very long meeting, but I feel like it helped draft our letter that we gave to the Land Use Commission. So thank you very much for that.
I second that. Other comments on the minutes? All right, seeing none, we will assume that those are accepted. Moving on to discussion, no vote will be taken for Envision Evanston 2045 draft zoning code. So we did talk about the zoning code on December 12th, as we already talked about, but we've been asked since then to give comments on specific elements of the zoning code, although if anyone has other things that we want to talk about with the zoning code, we can talk about that as well. Do you want to help us through the specific parts of the zoning code that we're supposed to be talking about?
I will. I'll walk you through.
Thank you.
Some of this will take a little tour around town. Okay, so there's a few areas that we'll look at. These areas represent historically, culturally, or architecturally significant areas within the city. Although some of these may not be registered as historic districts or landmarks, they otherwise have a special interest or value to the city and its citizens. And I just want to preface really quickly that I think what the commission is deciding is whether the proposed zoning for these areas encourages their preservation, continued utilization, and rehabilitation, and if they respect their associated context, and if not, what they would recommend as an alternative. And so the first location that we'll look at is a portion of Chicago Avenue between Lee and Dempster Street. This directly abuts the Lakeshore Historic District to the east in low-density residential single-family homes. The existing zoning in this location is a mix of C1, C2, and B1. The existing zoning permits heights between 40 and 45 feet, a floor area ratio of between 1 and 2, and a rear yard setback of 15 feet. The proposed zoning for this location is M3. That permits, as of right, a height of up to 100 feet, a floor area ratio of 6, and a rear yard setback of 5 feet. And then quickly, I do want to read what Initiative 2.5 in Preserve 2040 says. This initiative specifically was crafted with this location in mind. It says, explore implementation of form-based zoning overlays in areas of significant redevelopment potential adjacent to historic districts or where high concentrations of landmarks exist. Areas of significant redevelopment potential, particularly within transit-oriented development corridors adjacent to local historic districts, such as the Chicago Avenue corridor, represent a potential threat to integrity of setting. Form-based overlays should be explored, which identify approaches which enable more sensitive transitions in height, bulk, and form as new developments approach a district's boundary. And if it's at all helpful, we can explore what this location looks like. Let me turn the lights down. And see. These are the locations of the corridor that are currently zoned B1, I believe, on this side, the east side of Chicago Avenue. And we are traveling south at the moment.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
While you're going down the street? So are those homes on Hamilton? Those are in the Lakeshore Historic District?
They are. This is somewhat of the gateway here. So this house is within the district. This is a fourplex, which is within the district. The gas station is outside of the district. So I'll travel down the corridor briefly, and then we can jump onto Hinman and look at those homes. But I think I recall when we crafted the language in Preserve 2040, what we were looking at was the significant potential for redevelopment within this location. You have an extremely large surface parking lot, commercial properties that have been, changed many times over. There are also within this corridor properties that were identified by the State Historic Preservation Office as eligible for the National Register. This is one of them on the corner. This building is also listed on the Commission's study list of eligible properties for local landmark designation.
Kate, how tall is that building approximately, like just for point of reference, that just,
3 stories, it's probably 35 to 40
okay,
feet tall.
thank you, just.
Again, I think when we looked at it, these properties were actually having conversations about redevelopment on this side, the east side here, these car dealerships, this location as well. As we continue traveling down. This is another property that's eligible for the National Register and is also listed as eligible for landmark designation. This property as well was listed eligible for the National Register by the state, as was this property. These are both listed on our study list of locally eligible properties. This property was also listed as eligible for the National Register.
Yeah, the cow ahead.
And then this is Main Street. And then we can quickly jump down onto Hinman.
Sorry, Kate, the building on Main and Chicago, the newer one, that's 6 stories? This one?
This building here. One,
The one here, let's make sure that we're talking into our microphones.
2, 3, 5, 6. Looks like an 8-story building to me.
It's 10 stories. So that's roughly 100 feet,
Yeah,
roughly.
110.
So in reference, what is the old Evanshire Hotel, the at the corner of
Here?
Hinman? Yeah, this one.
70, 78,
78.
we're told from the audience.
This building is also listed as eligible for the National Register.
So when you're saying eligible, individually eligible or eligible as a district down this corridor?
So when the city went through the Chicago Avenue Corridor project, that went through a Section 106 process, and the state identified, I think, maybe somewhere between 12 and 20 properties along the corridor that they felt were eligible.
But individually or as a district? Individually eligible for the National Register?
That's what they, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you can answer this, but
She doesn't have Thank you.
the red brick building,
This one?
no, the one we were just looking at down the street, the taller one. Keep turning. No. Other way. The one at the end of this one. That's probably about 100 feet high, correct? If it's 8 stories?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 8. It looks like an 8-story building.
So
That's probably 85 to 90 feet.
85, 90. It's close. It's the closest one to 100 feet high that we've seen. Correct.
Yeah.
Now we're traveling south on Hinman.
North.
North on Hinman, sorry.
Sometimes it's helpful to see them in wintertime.
Are the lot sizes along Hinman relatively uniform in size? Or no? I mean, it seems that there's some variation with.
Backyards on the west side, abutting the Chicago Avenue properties are much shallower.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Just asking to come
Yeah, so, sorry, we do need to talk into microphones because of the Public Meetings Act and recording it. So, there's a gentleman in the audience who was saying something about the back lots. If you just,
Sure,
we're not really supposed to have a back and forth during this time, but it's okay if you want to
Yeah,
just give us the data.
Question, as a homeowner on that block, the question was if the lots are uniform in size. And they're significantly more shallow on the west side of Hinman, abutting the Chicago Avenue properties. And they start at Lee Street very shallow, and then they get slightly wider because of the angles of the street. But they're not uniform, bottom line.
But were you asking about along Hinman or depth back to the alley?
I think he both, and so I
Okay.
guess he answered it.
Okay.
Because it's interesting that the street grid is a little wonky in this
yeah.
type of, and it, like he said, it widens as you go north. So
But these are not like these huge properties abutting the alley. These are relatively modest, I mean, for this area.
right.
So putting a large building, like a really large building next to it is going to be really not good.
I mean, I don't know if we're still doing our walkthrough, or can I
Oh, no, please, yeah, open
have
it
a
up for
comment?
Yeah, go
comments.
ahead.
Because
Yeah.
I mean, just like in general, like I think it needs to be acknowledged that the history of this area, that it's kind of car and carpet row. There's all these Oriental carpets and old car dealerships along this road, and that kind of is the history of that row. Some of them date back pretty early in car history. So I mean, we're trying to get rid of cars, it seems, in our comprehensive plan with parking and everything. But this part of town has a rich car history to it because of these car dealerships, and they're already built. The other thing is that the organization Southeast Evanston was formed partially because of zoning pressure in the area. I think it was light industrial, if I'm correct. I think it was something dealing with zoning that caused the creation of this organization, similar to Central Street Neighbors Association. So I think that context would help us understand this area.
Cade, can you tell us again the current zoning? Is it all one zoning? Is it, you said C, was it?
It's a mix of three, but they're more similar than they're not, at least in terms of their mass and bulk. So it's C1, C2, and B1.
Okay, in all three of those, is multifamily residential permitted?
I would, I'd have to double check, but I wouldn't think so in C1 and C2. I'm probably in B1, but I would have to check.
Okay, what I'm getting at is, can Evanston still fulfill its desire for greater density without changing the zoning one bit along this corridor? That's something that I'd want to know.
In terms of the height, when you talk about multifamily, where are you thinking?
Well, a lot of these are 1 or 2 story or no story. It's a parking lot. So if the city wants to see this developed, and you can go, Kate, I think you mentioned 45 feet. I don't know if that's all the districts, but at least partially, if not all of them. That means developing these assuming multi-unit residential is permitted, would in fact allow for a greater number of residential units along that strip without touching the zoning at all.
Right. It would be like retail along the bottom and then 3 stories above of retail. Is
Could
that
be.
what would fit?
Could be.
Something like that? Yeah, Stuart.
Yeah. I mean, in theory, as a corridor of development, given that the Dempster Street end of this corridor already has a few very tall residential buildings, in principle, I think the idea of replacing, surface parking and car lots for car dealers with commercial use and residential use is per se probably as a long-term goal not a bad one. The thing I think that becomes immediately clear is that this is not one zoning district, that the density on the east side of Chicago Avenue should be restricted so that apartment buildings are probably in scale with the apartment buildings that are currently there, which would mean 4 or a maximum of 5 stories, whereas as has already started to happen on the west side, which is in large part frontage against the train tracks, you've gotten higher development. The question of how high those buildings ought to be allowed to be is interesting, because I think that as a potential pedestrian thriving, vital pedestrian environment with street level commercial use, one of the things that happens when you get 100-story buildings is you get wind patterns and kind of really unfriendly areas to walk in. So, in theory, I think the ultimate redevelopment of these areas as residential or mixed residential and ground level commercial is okay, but I think the densities are mistaken, and the idea that the east and the west side should be zoned the same is, I think, as the people who came tonight have pointed out, a big mistake.
So I would agree with that. On the east side, it could be some portion lower, and the west side could be some portion higher, and there could be a step down towards the historic district. And we have the power, if we wanted, to say, we think it could certainly have some residential there, solve some of these, create supply, right? Which is a issue.
We need more customers for all the legacy businesses in the main Dempster Mile.
Could I ask a question about that area? The building height, particularly on the east side. How do you think that that condition would respond to the noise of the train? You kind of create is going to bounce off of those buildings. I don't know if it becomes really a problem. The other thing is because Chicago Avenue is so narrow. It's a pretty narrow street, and when you start to get a canyon effect, that certainly you got north-south winds blowing through there. It would probably be worth it to study the aesthetic effects of building height and materials.
Yeah. No residential developer in his right mind would do it, but there is an interesting residential building type which is referred to as single loaded, which means that you would plan buildings against the train tracks where the building circulation, the elevators, stairs, and hallways would face west, and then the apartments would face east. The problem with that is that I think to get a developer to actually consider a plan like that, you would have to give them a floor area zoning bonus to encourage that. And the problem is, I think they just as soon face the apartments in either direction, because once you get above 4th or 5th floor, with the noise isn't as problematical.
There are a lot of apartment buildings in Chicago that are right up near the L track, and they've worked it out. There's a museum right up next to the L track at DePaul right there at the Fullerton stop. And I know the architect that did that, and they just put sound baffling and stuff in the wall there in order so that when you're inside the museum, it's not as bad. So it is possible, but because it's such a narrow site, maybe they would single load it and it would work out.
I was actually considering as much the street level noise, not just inside the buildings, but
You mean in terms of not being able to hear the L as much at the street level?
It's like you were saying about feel, and
Right.
sometimes you don't know why you're uncomfortable or why it doesn't seem right. But maybe I'm more sensitive to this kind of thing, but particularly in the wintertime, when you don't have the effect of leaves buffering the sound and stuff, things like that, it can be pretty jarring. And I'm not saying that it's going to be so bad that people are going to like lose their hearing or go crazy or anything. I'm just talking about just considering all the effects. That's all.
Wouldn't necessarily. It could be offices on that side. Wouldn't necessarily have to be people trying to sleep through the night on that part of that side of the building either. Somebody creative could come up with some solution.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't come into play in writing zoning, but there are solutions to that. I think what was done at IIT, where there's actually a sound baffle, was effectively keeps the building that's built adjacent to the L insulated from the noise of the L, but that would have to be something that the city of Evanston would undertake as an incentive for the redevelopment of those sites.
So I have a question about, so what's proposed and what is the current zone, what is it, B1A for Central Street? And does that have required setbacks or,
The Central Street?
Yeah.
So B1A does not have the same kind of pseudo form-based code that the Central Street Overlay District has.
Okay.
So in the overlay supersedes the underlaying zone. So the overlay on Central Street has a series of required step backs as the building gets taller. So I think it limits height to the lesser of 3 stories, 30 some feet maybe. Above the first full floor, you're required to step back 10% of the building's length. And then above the full second floor, you're required to step back 15% of it. So it slowly steps back as it steps away from the floor.
I just think that was developed by the community with a city planner, and I think that could be a potential solution for Chicago, something similar.
In the reverse almost, where the step back
Yeah.
happens from the alley side.
Right.
Right, that's what I was
Right,
going to
that's
say.
what I'm
The
saying.
step back happens from the alley.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm also a little concerned about the setback from the front. I don't know exactly what the new code calls for, but we talked about human scale in our letter. And like when I think of that, I think of the Davis Street, kind of Benison's, that like corridor there has like all lower buildings, and it feels good to like walk on that area, bike lanes. And then Chicago Avenue, parts of it now, even you're so close to like a busy street, it's like hard to walk on it. And then if we're going to further develop it with these really tall buildings, I just wonder how human scale it will be and how friendly it will be to will people want to live there? Like, is that what we want from our new residences? Like, I guess that's something I would want to think about, is that street side and the setback and how friendly it is to walkers and bikers or anyone else.
And the proposed setback is 0 feet for the front. on M3. And then I do just want to answer John's question. The current zoning, multifamily of any kind is not permitted in either of the Cs, so the commercial districts.
Okay.
It's permitted in the business district, but only above the first floor.
You said not or now?
Is not.
Is not
Not.
permitted.
Is that a special use that could then be?
I don't think it's a special use in the commercial districts.
Okay. So it's no use that there's like no.
Correct.
Okay.
And then there
Interesting.
is, I'm somewhat hesitant to rely on the zoning framework that we have that's currently proposed, since I think it's expected to change. But there are two additional mixed-use districts. What's proposed along Chicago Avenue here is M3, but there is an M2 and even an M1 that exist. So that would allow multifamily, but you're reducing the height and the bulk. The lowest of that is M1, which is 50 feet in height, floor area ratio of 3.
So, in order to sort of move forward, based on everything I'm hearing here, can we start to develop some consensus on at least a few points? And could two of those be, number one, we don't feel that 100-foot, 10-story buildings adjacent to the Lakeshore Historic District in R1 is a good idea. And number two, we don't oppose the changing of some of the C districts to allow for multifamily or multi-unit residential.
I think that sounds pretty good to me. Is everyone in agreement in terms of a consensus? Yeah.
Is this the time to address setback also?
I was going to just have a quick follow-up to what John said, which is that we can say not 100, but I think it would be even stronger if we were to make some kind of recommendation in terms of what we actually think it could be.
I would, for myself, I wouldn't want to see anything greater than 4-story.
Because I think we also have to think, because we're focusing on the Chicago Avenue experience, but we also have to think about it from Hinman or from Judson or from within the district looking west. And what do we think, a perspective of, what do we want, I think is appropriate, because we also don't want to block out the western sky from most of the district.
One of the things I was thinking about is if the height would, I don't think right now in the zoning proposals, then there's anything about height being related to proximity to L stations or other public transportation like hubs. And I think that in my mind, it makes sense when you do see the larger residential buildings near those L stations. And so I would be more open to the 4-story buildings, closer to Dempster and Maine, and whereas the breadth of that corridor, though, I would still like to see it even maybe commercial +2. So, and then capped by the taller buildings at the more pedestrian, intersections where everybody's walking to and from the L. Just an idea for.
Yeah, is commercial +2 going to actually, if we were to suggest that, be lower than what it currently is? Because I'm not sure that will be. Because it's currently 40, right?
It's currently between 40 and 45 feet, and the floor
we could-
area ratio is really the limiting factor
Instead
there,
of
which
maybe
is
doing-
between 1 and 2.
Okay. Go ahead, Carl.
Sorry, I didn't. Instead of doing a height, maybe we do like a datum line or something, like based on like the what is existing now, and then just like continue that line across. I don't know.
The famous zoning in New York drew a line down in 1910, drew a line down the center of the street and then drew like abstract lines across or down. So we could do something like that. I'm sorry?
I think they were sky exposure plans.
Yeah, to have setbacks and stuff. But in any case, so I mean, there is a precedent for having doing something like what Carl is suggesting. But in any case, if it's commercial +4, maybe along Chicago, but then suggesting some kind of formula for a modest setback along the alley so that it steps down towards the Lakeshore Historic District. I would be very comfortable suggesting that.
I would be comfortable with that also. And I don't want to lose sight of the residential district that's on the other side of the tracks
Right.
as well.
I think, can we do this in zoning that restricts the use of an alley or something? Because if that alley, I mean, if we're putting in, a lot of multifamily housing or whatever, and where's the loading dock going to go, and how are people going to move in and out of these? I mean, this is something to consider because it's currently mostly a residential alley, and I mean, how are we? I know that Trader Joe's does not use the alley. They have to have their truck come in, and they come like twice a day or something to the store off of Chicago.
So I don't know the answer to that question. Does anyone know the answer to?
I don't think a specific district would have separate loading requirements. That's pretty atypical. There's typically loading and parking requirements that apply to all, it would apply to the entire mixed use district. It wouldn't be specific to like this location. Where you get into those specifics are when in their plan developments, and you can look at what the impact is on the alley, and you could say, you can't have loading off the alley. I don't think you have the same leeway when someone's doing something as of right.
I do like what Beth was saying, though, about having some kind of being a little bit more open to specific locations in the corners near the L's, or something that might allow a little bit more if that's necessary to make a project work. That might be something, but still with the setbacks towards the district, so that there's, it just would be a little bit more dramatic in that case. They'd have to deal with that.
Well, I think Beth's idea is interesting because it allows for some rhythm or
Right.
like difference in height, so that instead of getting this canyon of just everything all one height.
Right, and it's those markers of development, like, oh, like this is a hub, this is an intersection, like, okay, and then here you have this really long stretch of currently commercial and parking lots. Kate, I just had a real quick question about the planned street improvements. The Chicago Avenue, I remember looking at it like a year ago when we saw the plan. Is the width of the street remaining the same? And then is the bike lane being added into the current? Like, are the lanes just being shifted? Like, are they digging into the sidewalk and the street is remaining the same?
I don't think the curb is changing. I think it's curb
curbs
to
are the
curb
same?
as existing is where the
Okay,
improvements
okay.
occur.
Okay.
So we're still talking about the same size lot, is what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
No,
Okay.
it's not going to change.
Thank you.
So then if we're comfortable with what we're talking about on the east side, do we want to make some kind of recommendation on the west side? Were they I don't know whether they were asking for us to make a recommendation on the west side, but I think we should go ahead and do it.
On the west side?
The west side?
I mean, I think you're free to make recommendations as you see fit. I think the most, the most egregious example is on the east side as it abuts, the lower residential.
But they're suggesting 100 feet on the west side as well, right?
I think the entire corridor, except for maybe just north of Dempster, is the M3.
Both sides of the street.
Both sides of the
Correct.
street.
Okay.
That's what I was asking.
Okay.
So are we comfortable letting that stand, or do you want to make a recommendation for that as well? We're talking about it.
How many stories is? I'm trying to understand. How many stories tall is the Albion building on Sherman? Because
Keep going, Carl.
Well, because I'm just trying to understand, because when you're on Hinman and you're looking, if you have 100-foot story building, it's going to be visible probably several blocks into the district. So I'm just trying to understand that. Back to my point of you have to think of it both ways. What's the experience within the district on Judson or Hinman and then also on Chicago Avenue, and I think we need to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Stuart, go ahead.
Yeah, I would recommend that we recommend limiting development on the east side of Chicago Avenue to 4 stories and on the west side to 8 stories. And the thing to keep in mind is that contemporary residential construction, that is all of the new high-rise buildings that have gone up, are generally flat plate concrete. The floor thicknesses probably vary between 6 and 8 inches, depending on column locations, and the floor to ceilings are rarely more than 8 feet. So for an 8-story building, you're really not talking about, even 80 feet in height.
Is that because of load?
It's the way they're building.
You go ahead and talk with the microphone, guys. Yeah.
Sorry, my
Thanks.
question was, is that because of load? And he says it's all based on spacing of the columns.
The floor thickness.
Right.
Yeah.
Matthew, did you have something to say? Oh, okay. Other thoughts? So he was suggesting, you were suggesting 8 stories, Stuart? 8 stories on the west side?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So how does everyone feel about that?
I think for myself, I'd like to see that number even lower. Now you do have a buffer of the tracks that you don't have on the east side, so I could see something like 6 stories.
Would there be a similar setback situation down to the track?
I really like that suggestion. I don't know if you're starting at 4 at Chicago Avenue, what that magic number is when you get to the alley. There's some complexities in the other components of bulk care, the setbacks and all that. I don't know if we can solve all that tonight, but I like the suggestion that it should step down and not be 4 stories, lot to lot.
Right. But then on the west side, are we going to also suggest a step down toward the L?
With the L being such a good buffer, I think I
Okay.
could probably see that staying at a uniform height.
All right. So are we comfortable with 6 on the west side? And
Say that again. With
6, are we comfortable with 6 stories on the west side and 4 stories on the east side with on the east side a step down towards the alley? Go ahead, Thomas.
I have a question about we're speaking for the Preservation Commission, and obviously super relevant on the east side. Why will they listen to us about the west side?
Carl, you were talking about.
Well, I think, it goes back to what I'm saying of the experience and character and setting of the historic district. And right now there's open sky. You can see the sky from looking west. And so if we keep it relatively moderately high, then it would maintain that character, but then also allow for development. I don't know if
There's also
if anyone else has any.
the National Register determined eligible buildings along this area too. Are there any? Can you point to us?
Yeah,
Are there
Sarah?
any in this?
There is the Junior League women's
in this
the thrift shop that's on the west side.
Okay.
Yeah, Chair Jarlett, you mentioned the eligible, landmark eligible. One of the questions that was asked earlier is what protections are there? They were asking what protections are there.
Yeah.
I think we should just call out, Kate did a nice job of saying these are eligible, these are eligible, these are eligible. And for those folks in the audience, eligibility means nothing until it's actually landmarked. So what that means is they meet the criteria and has to go through the process. And my understanding is anyone can nominate those buildings. Once they're landmarked, there is protections in place. So for all those buildings on that corridor, those historic buildings, couldn't any resident of Evanston potentially nominate some of these? Or I know we've talked about getting a subcommittee together to have some of those, go to the effort to nominate them. So, I just wanted to throw that out to the group so they know what that means.
Right. So just as a side note, I believe we did put the study list. So this is called the study list for the eligible buildings. We put that into the GIS, right? So that now when somebody requests demolition of one of those buildings or something, it gets flagged or no?
I don't think that ever happened.
Okay.
It was certainly a recommendation
So it was a request that we made, but the idea, are you all following, the public following? So there's buildings that could be nominated, which would then make this part of Chicago Avenue more relevant to our conversation. Okay.
I didn't hear, you said that a list exists or does not exist?
It does. It's called the study list.
Right.
It has some
'Cause we've
eligible
seen it,
buildings
right?
on it. Yeah, and the state has identified some buildings too in this area. That's what Cade was identifying. But they're not officially under our jurisdiction until they're landmarked.
But it's a public list. I mean,
It's a
anyone
public list.
anyone can get the list.
Anyone can, and they can bring it to us at any time.
And where did you say they could get the list?
It's on the, go ahead.
The list is on the Historic Preservation webpage, and there's also a copy with the clerk's office.
I think the question was if it was added to some kind of internal GIS map so that if there was a permit pulled or, a development was proposed, that staff would be alerted that, oh, that's on the study list. But right now they have to cross-reference a list.
Yeah,
It's
so
not
we,
on any other
so Kate and I
internal
were
map.
trying to get it into the city GIS so that it was flagged, but that hasn't happened yet. And that was one of the many initiatives we were working on.
I think it's also a reality. If it gets far enough that someone's seeking a permit, it's very, very hard to turn it around.
Yeah.
I'd like
Go ahead,
to.
Stuart. Yeah,
I'd
sorry.
like to reiterate what Tom said, because as a preservation commission, I think we can make a good argument for the east side of Chicago Avenue. But the question I would have with the high-rise development that's already taken place on the west side of Chicago Avenue, how would we as a commission make a preservation argument for limiting the height on that side of the street that would be listened to?
Well, that's part of the question that I wanted to respond to. And we are already making recommendations against allowing 4 units on any zoning lot anywhere in the city of Evanston, regardless of whether or not it abuts an R1 or the Lakeshore Historic District. So in my mind, limiting what may happen on the east side of Chicago Avenue, because we're thinking about people that might be in homes and neighborhood character that's on the west side, I don't see any problem with us commenting on what happens on the west side as well.
Heritage is not always only tangible. You've referred to this as car and carpet corridor, I think was the phrase you used. As you say, we could make recommendations wherever we want, and if this area has an intangible heritage, then we can make recommendations on it.
So one of my questions is, we keep interchanging specific height and stories. So in Charleston, I know that when they looked at their zoning, they did it based on stories, because technically you could have a tall first story for commercial and then shorter stories for residential above, and it would still be an 8-story building. Versus like what, if you just have like a strong like cutoff at 45 feet or 100 feet, whatever it is, that's different.
I think that's a good point. 4-story and 45 feet, then I think would be what we would be looking for.
I want to go back to something John said, and this is probably my fault for not having read the thing that Cade distributed carefully enough, but I would think that limiting the 4-unit building, or eliminating the possibility of 4-unit buildings in R1 and R2 is what we should do, as opposed to throughout the entire town. And I think that for me, the dilemma is if you permit a 4-unit building, you're talking about an apartment building, not a big multi-unit house. And we have an ADU ordinance, which means that you would get 5 units, the potential of 5 units. And I think the issue from a point of view of preservation is to encourage construction that's in scale with the neighborhood. And there are areas of Evanston, older areas of Evanston, that have beautifully integrated into the scale and nature of the streets double houses as a housing type and a permissible building for R1 and R2, that you can build 2 units, and with an ADU you're getting 3 units rather than 4 units.
I just want to remind everybody that that was in our letter. Thank you very much for summarizing that. I'm not sure that we were done with this part of the conversation, and we have 3 different sections of the zoning code that staff have asked us to comment on. So if we could just return, we were talking, I believe, about 4 stories versus 45 feet, right, John?
Yes, and
Right.
I would say
We were
not
at 40.
versus. I would say it's not to exceed 4 stories and 45 feet.
Okay, so not to exceed 4 stories and 45 feet. Do we have consensus on that? Plus a setback
On the
towards
east
alley.
side, right.
On the east side.
On the east side,
On the
correct.
east side, plus a modest setback towards the alley.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
everyone?
A lower number as it moves towards the alley.
Right. Beth, you were going to say? Go ahead.
Just say that one more time.
Sure. So not to exceed 4 stories or 45 feet and 45 feet
And this is on the west or the east?
on the east side. And then there would be a step down toward the alley, toward Hinman.
I would say that, I mean, they're not particularly deep. I think practically stepping down towards the alley is a little tough. I think what you want to do is just have more than a 5-foot setback. You know, I mean, because then what is the?
No, I get what you're saying, because you're munching away at the top floors.
Yeah, you're not
and-
gonna
and
have-
then you're-
Yeah.
You don't
A lot
end
of
up
times you get the parking in the back off the alley, and if it's just for parking and only 1.5 story or something like that, I could see going lot line on the alley side. So we can come up with different circumstances based on hypothetical scenarios. So
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, so setback, or I mean, we don't have to be terribly prescriptive here, but step down or more greater setback.
Step down or greater setback.
I don't understand.
What we're saying on the east side of Chicago,
Right.
limit the height at the street
Right.
to 4 stories, 45 feet, and then we're trying to figure out how to make a little bit gentler connection
You're talking
to,
about setback in terms of the
like
construction
how
of the
close
building.
the building could be to the
Alley.
rear. To the
Yeah, I
alley.
think you do it with setback from the alley.
To the street side.
No, to the alley
Right.
side.
So you're saying no setback is okay at the sidewalk.
No,
Between the sidewalk
that's
and
a
the
separate issue we haven't talked about yet.
Okay. So now we're talking about off the alley.
Yeah.
Right, to create a kind of smoother transition toward the Lakeshore Historic District in that side.
Right. They can't build anything.
Stuart, you want to, or you guys?
I was just saying that it ends up being like a kind of like the ziggurat, where you just
Right.
have like zigzag going up the front and the back.
Nobody's going to build there.
I would just, it's building height. The other regulation is going to be floor area ratio. Those don't match necessarily. So, you're going to say, maybe it's 45 feet, 50 feet, but the FAR might be 3. I think it would be logical to just say the reduction in that bulk happens towards the rear of the building.
That would be fine with me.
Sure.
Reduction in bulk towards the rear.
That was my New Year's resolution, anyways.
I'm sorry? No, I didn't hear.
It was also suggested by Stuart, or greater setback,
Or a greater setback.
if that's fine with.
I don't think we have to hammer out the details necessarily for
Exactly.
what this was
Too many
exactly be, but I think
scenarios.
the feedback has been very positive that as it approaches the district, the bulk should be reduced and that we think a more compatible height
and do we
is
want to say
almost what's existing.
slightly higher and greater bulk on the west side of
Yeah.
Chicago Avenue?
Yeah, let's see. That sounds fine to me. Is everyone
Yes.
consent?
I would have no problem with limiting it to 80 feet instead of 100 feet.
Yep.
With no other kind of restrictions.
8 stories and 80 feet, something like that.
Well, 80 feet might get you, depending on how big the ground floor is, it might get you more than 8 floors.
Okay.
Is that
Depending
for
on
the
the
west
design.
side? Is that where?
On the west side, yeah.
Yeah, I would like to see
Instead
it
of 100.
lower, like kind of like John mentioned. I think 6
Oh, yeah,
stories
we
is
did
what-
talk about
And,
six.
and part of that conclusion was as we rode down the street, we saw
Right, right.
6, 7, or 8 story buildings, and they felt very, very tall and out of context with what would be on the other side of the tracks there.
All right, that's true. Go ahead. Steve.
Being able to see the sky from the east side of Chicago Avenue is certainly a nice feature. With the train tracks there, I don't think the height of what you build on the east side of the train tracks, other than blocking morning sun, has any impact on what's on the west side of the train tracks. The train tracks, because it's the CTA and the Metro, are really wide as a buffer. I mean, I don't think there's any kind of visual connection between the construction on one side and the construction on the other side. I mean, I've lived east on Main Street for a very long time and watched literally the transformation of Main and Chicago with some mixed feelings, but I can't say that I object to the scale and urbanity that's been created as opposed to, what was there before, which was four or 5 story buildings.
So what was Main Street is currently Dempster, right?
Yes.
So like currently what we have on Dempster Street with that terracotta,
East-west.
historic terracotta building on the northern side is this 1-story building. And that used to be like I'm dating myself, where the White Hen used to be, and on Main Street, it used to be a lovely terracotta building that's now, like Stuart's saying, is this big urban node next to a train station. So the question is, do we want that to happen at Chicago and Dempster, like what happened at Chicago and Maine with all those intact historic buildings at that intersection? Where the Fishbowl building was.
Yeah, I think ultimately the way you prohibit that is you landmark those buildings. The problem is that knowing the owners of some of those buildings, that if at some point in the next 5-6 years, Chicago Avenue starts taking off in terms of larger scale residential development, they will sell those properties and Dempster will look like Maine and Chicago.
Everyone's looking for a counteroffer here, so Commissioner Cohen and I will see your 8 stories and try to lower it to 7. I agree with you. There is a significant buffer between the 2 sets of tracks, and there are in fact not that many houses on the that abut the tracks without a interceding road in between. So if we're looking for a consensus so that we can move on, I'm okay with. I would prefer to see 6. I will not object strongly to 8.
I would also just, for everyone's own information, what we're talking about is what someone can do as of right. So there's still an opportunity that someone can build higher, more denser, more units. There's just a plan development process that's a little more prescriptive.
And I wanted to ask, is that what happened to the very tall ones at the corner of Maine and Chicago?
I think those are all plan developments.
Okay, and that would also assist in Beth's concern about some little transit-oriented spikes in height on an individual case by case through a PUD.
Do the plan development folks have to come here and talk to us about that?
Can we?
Hold on a second, Carl.
Okay.
Not unless it involves a historic building.
So if it's adjacent to a historic district, they don't have to come here?
There's no requirements for adjacencies, no.
Okay. Did you guys know that?
To answer a question, could we call on Councilmember Nguyen, who has experience with those developments at Chicago and Maine, to answer the question if they were planned developments or not.
Do you know? Come on.
Hello, everyone.
Oh,
Melissa Wynn, council member for the Third Ward. And I've been on the council for the entire time that the Main in Chicago was developed. The Wild Fork building, which is the red brick building, is 115 feet. That's built as of right. That corner of Main and Chicago was zoned and has been zoned B3, which permits 115 feet. And that was zoned B3 long ago. 25 years ago, just after I joined the council, I, with a group of neighbors, worked to downzone Chicago Avenue south of Main Street to what is now C1A, which permits 66 feet. We attempted to change the corner where the main building is built. The owner of that property sued us and said that they were in the pipeline for a new development. We lost at the lower court, we appealed it, and we lost again. So that corner is built as of right. They were PUDs because we changed our PUD ordinance, at least not the Wild Fork building, but the other two buildings on the one across from the newest one was a PUD, and that's approximately 100 feet.
The southeast corner?
The southeast corner.
Yeah.
The northwest corner is not 100 feet. It's probably about 80. So the answer to your question was that existed. And I mean, my only thought on it was that decades ago, there was the sense that maybe this would be like a satellite downtown. And that's why they changed it to B3. But no one acted on it until 2000, 1998, 2000.
So if we can write into
Thank
our
you very much.
suggestions that in certain circumstances, when things are appropriately buffered by either train tracks or a taller apartment building, that we do not object to that kind of transit-oriented sub-downtown kind of taller development without getting into like the real deep specifics of it.
That would be fine with me. Objections to that, or does everyone feel comfortable with that? Okay. All right. Thank you. It is 8:30. I think we can keep going on the next item on Cade's list.
Sorry, Chair Darlow, where did we end up with on the west side? I guess I'm not clear. Did we say 6 floors and then we can make exceptions like he was saying? I'm not sure where we ended up on the west side.
So I was under the impression that we were kind of going to leave it a little bit more open. But maybe we need to clarify that before we move on.
I think it should be more specific. I mean, I don't think we know what we
more open
want.
is more realistic, but I think we should, as a commission, say that we think 100 feet is too high.
Sounds
I think
good.
That's I think probably, I feel comfortable with that. Just go with that. And be more specific on the side of Chicago Avenue that is directly adjacent to the landmark district. Okay. All right. Okay. So that's where we're going to leave it. Next up on the items for the zoning code.
There are two that are somewhat similar. This is going to stretch Stuart's mind, I think, a little bit, but these are not historic districts, Stuart, nor are there many landmarks in these locations. What these are considered areas that have special interest and value to the community, and that they may contain potentially historic resources. So what I want to look at is the core of Main Street, west of the tracks.
Can we please not touch this block for the next 5 years because they've already been through enough?
So these These locations are currently zoned B2. As of right, the height permitted is 45 feet with a floor area ratio of 2. The proposed zoning is M2 with an as of right height of 65 feet and a floor area ratio of 5.
Do we know how big the building that replaced Vogue Fabrics is?
I think it's a 5-story building.
And what are the boundaries that we're talking about west of the track?
I think that the core of this neighborhood district is really west of the tracks.
To the school.
Doesn't it go all the way down to Park School because there's that
It does.
apartment building that's across the street from it?
That building?
Here's Park School.
This one?
Okay, did you say 4 stories?
For the existing?
Yes.
The existing zoning is 45 feet and a floor area ratio of 2. Proposed is 65 feet, floor area ratio of 5.
Okay. And we just saw a 4-story building that's probably close to 45 feet, a little west of where you are right now. Just want to point that out.
Let's go back and look at that.
Right there,
Right.
just so we get a feel for that.
That's the max right now.
Current max right there.
On both sides of the street, right? North and south.
And the proposal is to go up to 65?
Yeah, 65 and a floor area ratio of 5.
I recommend no on that.
Me too.
Similarly, and for partially some of the same reasons we just discussed on the last district, but this has a unique pedestrian scale quality to it that you don't necessarily expect on Chicago Avenue, but you do sense on Main Street. And I think it would be tragic to have 65-foot tall buildings lining that road.
And Kate, did you say it was both sides?
So
of Main
here's
Street?
an interesting question. What provides pedestrian scale along a street of this width? Is it the height of the buildings? Or is it the treatment of the ground floor? When you say it has pedestrian scale, why couldn't you have, 4-story apartment buildings, for instance, of the scale of what we looked at with ground floor developments that made for a reasonable urban pedestrian environment?
I think that would be just fine, but that's not what they're suggesting in the new zoning code.
I think what Stuart's saying is like on that block, Virag and other stores have these interesting storefronts that kind of they're set back into the building with display windows. And so that kind of visually widens the street, but then also adds some interest at the commercial first floor.
Well, I totally agree with you, but it's not a function of the fact that it's a 1-story versus a 2-story or a 3-story building. It's a function of the fact that architecture and the architects building things today are so bad it's pathetic.
So,
Or the developers. Yeah, it's a
Go ahead, John.
I wonder if this is a scenario where we could use the case in Manhattan that I'm sure Stuart can discuss, where the further away you get from the property line, the taller you can go. So it'd be nice to see the 1- and 2-story, 3-story scale, maybe even 4 up at the sidewalk level, and then go to the 6-story towards the back of the lot.
All right, so just for context, since I brought up the 1910 zoning law in New York, that the idea is that there's a line down the center of the street, and then there like an abstract line or pretend line down the middle of the street, and then there are these sort of diagonal lines that come up, and so it creates an opportunity for bulk, but they have to step it back at specific intervals so that it's all regular. That's what you're talking about.
I think setbacks at upper levels are fine, but I think the minute you permit whoever's building on a site like the west side, the west area of Main Street, if you permit them to determine the setback and suddenly you don't have building faces aligned, then I think the pedestrian experience and the quality of their urbanity is forever destroyed.
So we did suggest in our letter the Design Commission, Urban Design Commission, to help with some of that. But in this particular case, we're talking about zoning, and I don't know whether we can say.
Also, zoning ordinances can have very specific requirements for how a building is articulated and the pattern of fenestration and entrances. And so, you could ask that in these special locations that the code be more prescriptive in that regard.
So in
Well,
that case,
historically, the way...
I'm sorry, we can't have public comment right now unless we're asking a question.
Yeah, I was going to say historically in some cities, the way things like that has been handled is if you want if you want the property developed in a certain way, then you encourage that by giving basically zoning bonuses, which allow the developer to offset the cost of doing what you're asking them to do, whether it's a special setback or a street arcade, whatever it is, by giving them the ability to build more square foot area on that site. I don't know that Evanston zoning will or should get prescriptive to that point, but I do think things like uniform setbacks on streets and and limiting height, certainly, if Main Street is suddenly all 8 or 9 story buildings, then the character has been changed in a way that doesn't make it an urban shopping street, a semi-urban shopping street as it currently is.
Did you want to say something? I'm sorry, Lisa, go ahead.
So first of all, the thing we're not paying attention to is the FAR is going from 2 to 5, which is huge. We're just building boxes. And the second thing is behind this are houses, right? 2-story houses. So we're not, these guys all showed up because they love their homes. We're not hearing from these people, but we have the same thing.
Yes, but to the point that we were talking about earlier, that's not a historic district, right, behind there. So.
No, but we still have to
We should
consider
still be
the
respectful.
neighbors.
Yeah, no, for sure. But we have to be careful with.
Right, I understand. But if we build a 45-foot building or a 65-foot building that's a solid block, we're destroying the neighborhood to the next side.
I don't think there was anyone was there anyone on the commission that thought that the proposed zoning was a good idea?
No.
Okay. All right. So we have consensus that that's a no.
Well, we had some debate about whether or not it was the height of the building versus the quality of the character at the sidewalk level and the detailing. But even the most beautiful building built 6 stories high along this corridor, I think would feel harsh.
Right.
I think it would just.
Yeah, how about 4 stories and 40 feet for the street?
I like that.
Beth, go ahead.
I think one of the defining characteristics here is just that contiguous roof line. It's not exact or anything, but it steps up, steps down. But I think being able to read that street as that, you literally have those visual lines that, perspective lines. And they work at the window level. They work at the street level. They work at the curb of the streets. Everything is just perspective right there. And it ends, at the defining point there. And so I think there's a real defining character there that I think introducing or losing those lines and that comfort that provides the pedestrian, the bike rider, even to the driver along that street, I think you're really losing something there. I don't have the answer, but I think that's just something that would be. It's amazing that it's still kept here on so much of this stretch. It's not the whole thing, obviously, but it's a real treasure to still have. and especially then backed by the residential areas where you don't have anything behind them as obstructing that view either, because you still have the houses behind these areas. So.
Kate, can you walk us through?
Yeah. So, right. So Kate was just saying that, the we're talking about this because staff has asked us to look at these specific issues. So we could just tell them that we don't think that the change here is appropriate. We don't have to go into any additional detail
A specific
right now.
number. We're really, we can't come up with all the hypotheticals and,
Right.
and cover every. We just
I
want it
mean-
relooked at. We don't think it's as good as proposed.
Right. I mean, we could just tell them, look, that's just not appropriate. They're asking us for our feedback, and we could just be very clear about that.
I would say also that we need to keep in mind all of our longstanding businesses in these districts, and that any new development may potentially lead to increased commercial rent for those storefronts. And I would hate to see our longstanding businesses have to contend with that increased rent.
Before we kind of chime in on any more of these, one thing I want to understand is how the PUD process works. And correct me if I'm wrong, there are not zoning lots that are just called a PUD. It's something else to begin with. A developer has an idea, they come before the city council or whoever, and they get permission to treat it as a PUD, and they write a whole new set of rules for that. So anything that we come up with here that is less dense or aggressive in terms of development than what has been proposed can still be re-looked at on any individual lot in order to create some greater density in unique scenarios, like the Vogue fabric building. That was kind of a unique corner, and people wanted more. I think it was very attractive to have greater residences in that, even though it was some of the businesses suffered for all the construction that went on. Now they have more customer base, basically. So I just want to keep that in mind, that what we come up with here does not prohibit the PUD process of creating unique scenarios where we can get the greater density that they're looking for.
I'm kind of having a problem with this whole process. It's like we are attempting to design city blocks sitting here in this conversation. Seems like a stretch for me. My head is really spinning because I can get into a lot of detail that would go.
It's like trying to play God.
Exactly.
Well, the zoning code is coming, and they've asked us to weigh in, and so we have this opportunity.
Kate, can you go to the Campagnola building? Pull up the Campagnola building. And one question I have is, this is something that maybe I would like to know if it's possible to avoid.
What is he talking about?
Treachery.
No, Campagnola on Chicago Avenue.
There used to be a movie theater, right? Or there was a movie.
A little further.
There it is.
So I watched those buildings being built
On either side of it?
on either side of that building. So one thing is that the treatment of not necessarily landmark buildings, but kind of remarkable buildings. And is there any way to secure their identity in terms of this attempt to become more dense, to preserve them in some way?
You mean in terms of
Is there any words you can put into a like a zoning document? Anything that would say that because what we're talking about here is the character of an area, for instance, and I would have liked to maybe have that building not be necessarily dominated by those buildings.
Well, we did, I mean, for buildings that are landmarks or districts, we did say in our letter that we wanted to make sure that there was some advisory review for projects that were adjacent.
I think we also asked for design guidelines.
Yeah,
too.
so that was the
So-
Urban Design Commission and
right.
all of that.
That's
stuff.
right.
Yeah.
So I think that's what Charles is, I
Yes.
think,
Yep.
getting at is there some kind of like, I think we use building typology, characteristic or features of buildings that are prominent in a certain area, and can that be encouraged?
Yeah, as a point of, I think we talked about that as a point of inspiration. That was in the land use strategies section of our letter.
I just have the feeling we're kind of getting away from that in this conversation about buildings and setbacks, and that we're allowing for boxes to be placed along the street, and the danger is that there's no kind of design or vision applied to the process, just allowing the process.
I mean, hopefully they take the two suggestions simultaneously and integrate them. It was one of the first things that we put in the letter. But besides the two missing chapters, I think that was one of the first things that we talked about.
Well, I'm old enough to know that hoping in terms of development is not a good strategy.
Right.
You know, I mean, I love the word planning because it means something, but in many ways it's almost meaningless. And I think that urban design, or whatever it is we would like to think we're trying to accomplish, starts with a vision. But because each of these pieces of property is owned by a different person, it's subject to sale, it's subject to development under the zoning that we recommend. There are good architects and bad architects out there, that the best that we can do is to try and figure out how to use laws like zoning to implement a vision that we have. And if there was, in fact, something so extraordinary about the facade, the sort of Venetian facade of Campagnola, then the thing you do is you either landmark the building, which probably isn't feasible, but there are cities in which facades have been landmarked.
Why can't that be landmarked? Commissioner Cohen, you mean because the owner would be resistant? Is that what you? Yeah, you
So
said.
landmarking the whole building?
Yeah, you said that.
I don't know. The minute you landmark it, you lock certain things in place, and that really limits the development possibilities for that building. You can't build high. If it's landmarked, you really can't build on top of it. You can't build higher. You can't set back and put another 4 stories of apartments on top of it. Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that owners tend to not want their buildings landmarked is because of the way in which it limits use and further development or future development.
Well, we're trying to work on that, but yeah, I mean, in Evanston we have the rule that the owner has to agree, or no? No, we don't have that. But in the case of the church that we tried to landmark a few years back, they went to city council and that was overturned. So there's a process, which, I mean, it's a public process, so that's fair. In any case, I feel like we're straying from Main Street.
Can we say that we have a consensus on the proposed zoning changes to the Main Street corridor are that we feel that the height and the number of stories is too high, and that the change in the FAR is too high?
Yes.
Okay.
I would say, do we feel comfortable with that, Stuart and Carl?
I'm sorry, what am I agreeing?
Yeah.
What am I agreeing to?
I feel like my professor in class.
Oh, yes.
Okay. So I think we have consensus on that and we feel comfortable moving forward. It's 8:52, but we only have one more item. Does everyone want to, I know we usually take a break at 9, but do you want to keep going? with the, yes,
like to
Thomas
keep
says keep
going.
going. Yeah, Matthew says keep going. All right. What's our next piece?
So the same parameters that you just looked at for Maine, but same condition on Dempster. So again, Dempster Street existing is between 40 and 45 feet, floor area ratio of 2. Proposed is height of 65, floor area ratio of 5.
West of the tracks?
West and east.
So from Chicago Avenue over?
How far west are we going to?
How far west?
Does that just go to the tracks?
I think it goes to.
It ends around Maple.
Yeah. And you mean east of the tracks? I think east of the tracks is just
Oh, all the way past Chicago Avenue?
is to here.
It goes all the way to Hinman or to the alley?
Alley.
To the alley.
Okay.
So from the alley
There goes blind faith.
between Chicago Avenue and Hinman.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing that you
hold on
know.
a
If you
I'm-
change the
I'm
zoning
sorry,
there,
hold on a second.
that's all gone.
Hold on a second. We're just trying to figure out our locations here. From the alley between Hinman and Chicago Avenue on the east, all the way over to Maple. Is that what we're saying? Yes. Okay. And on both sides of the street? And currently, oh, okay. Oh, this helps.
Same exact changes that were proposed on Main Street, just a different street. Okay, I feel identically to the Dempster Street corridor.
So do I. Carl, you were going to say?
We were just trying to talk about on Dempster going west to Elmwood. There's commercial on both. It's on both sides of Dempster to Elmwood, but then it becomes resident. Yeah.
So it goes to Elmwood and not Maple?
Right, because there's a parking lot and then there's the apartment building and then it just goes into residential to Ridge.
Yeah, but I'm
And
talking
it
about
does,
the zoning.
It does end at Elmwood.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
so
And then
that,
it transitions to R4
Right.
on the west side of Elmwood.
that's what we needed to know, what the zoning situation was, not
Between
necessarily where
between Elmwood and the alley.
Okay. And not on the south side there, where the tracks are. That's red?
Right here?
Yeah.
This is M3, so this is the same designation that you saw along the entire Chicago Avenue corridor, so that's 100 feet in height.
So that red, am I reading this correctly? That's the abandoned rail line. That's right. That's so because you have
But on that side of the street.
Don't you have Bagel Art, and then you have the tracks, but then there's 3 tracks there, I think, because there's CTA Metra, and then there's like this spur that has those old staircases that are blocked off.
On the far west side of
Yeah.
those, yes.
I was looking on the south side of the street. Oh. No, but what about, there's over to the left. There's a commercial right there. And that's
I don't know exactly what parcel this is
that's
catching.
that one. That's red. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I was talking about.
Yeah, that's
that used to be a thrift shop or
right,
something.
It's the alley between the Taylor and the and so that's 100 feet there.
It's proposed.
That's
Proposed.
M3.
Yeah, I
It's
know,
proposed
proposed.
100 feet.
So what are we doing? Seattle Space Needle there?
So in any case, I think it sounds to me that we have consensus on that as well, that that what's proposed there is not appropriate.
And can I just bring up that on that entire there's nothing over 2 stories high, which on Main Street in Chicago, there are buildings over 2 stories high. There is nothing over there over 2 stories high. So I don't know if we want to take that into consideration or not.
We could qualify our statement that in either of these corridors, we would want to see any proposed changes stay closer to the existing height bulk that currently exists there.
I agree with that.
And that way, we're not trying to find a magic number here also.
Right. Does everyone feel comfortable with that? Charles, I can't see you. Is that a yes?
I'll tell you, my problem is that I keep looking for green space. I keep looking for trees and shrubs. And we just keep packing it in. And along with the problem, well, I don't know, it was identified that we have less open space, green space, park space than any other community like us by half. But in our pursuit of density, we are only making that problem worse. But I just look for every opportunity to be more organic in terms of, just basically the way I look at any of this kind of development within a community. We're not talking about how much space there would be between buildings, whether or not there should be a certain amount of a break in the buildings every so distance, and of course that would have to be like with public parks probably or something. But when I look at a block like that, and I like the idea we talked earlier about having the kind of mixed heights, a lot of diversity, and so that things are broken up, and you can see sky every now and then, even though you might walk past a 10-story building, and maybe the next one is going to be 6 and down to 4 or whatever. But it's kind of hard to put that into the kind of plan that we're given. What we're asking to give here is kind of hard to go in that direction. So I'll just be quiet.
There is potential for an urban park in that area, though, because there is that abandoned rail line that could potentially become some kind of interesting elevated park that provides landscaping in an area that's lacking of landscaping.
I think that kind of thing makes a lot more palatable, and as you're looking in the feel of these spaces. And anyway, thank you, Carl.
John, were you going to say something? No. Beth?
Yeah, just to his point is that I totally agree, and I think that to kind of address your concerns about the green space, absolutely. Like when we're sitting up here talking about building heights or setbacks, then what I'm hoping, tell me if I'm wrong, there should be the other, Parks and Rec group will be making their recommendations from their point of view. Sustainability will be making their recommendations from their point of view. Our point of view right now just needs to kind of stick to the preservation lens, knowing that our partner city organizations, city commissions are going to be addressing their parts. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah, that's the idea. Yeah. The various commissions were at Land Use Commission last time and made our.
But in terms of character, I definitely see preservation as being, that's one of the things that I would like to think we would want to also preserve is that kind of character to the spaces we're dealing with. We shouldn't seek to make them more dense purposely when they are, when there's more trees now. We don't want to encourage cutting down trees and building more buildings necessarily. I just don't want to go down this road and not have the sense of nature and stuff being part of preservation.
Yeah, do we have anything more on the
There's
zoning?
a major park about 2 blocks to the north of that. And I've been in that area for 25 years now. My office is on Sherman around the corner from what you've all been looking at. And I would say to Charles, what trees? And it's shopping, and it should continue being shopping. None of those buildings are of any, in my opinion, of any real architectural significance. So if the zoning were increased just slightly, they might come down and be replaced with larger scale stuff over time. And in terms of the urban quality of that corner and of that section of Dempster, I don't think that would be bad, although as someone who literally lives there 8 hours a day, I'd hate to lose some of the shops that are in that area.
I think that our recommendation covers what the staff wants, and would just let staff know, Kate, if you wouldn't mind, that they're welcome to reach back out to us, and if we come up with other ideas, we'll forward those along. Were there any other questions that they had and things that they were asking us to weigh in on?
Yeah, there's several more.
Oh, I thought there were only 3. I thought there were only 3, so I was. But it's 9 o'clock. How many more are there?
2.
2 more? How do you guys feel? You want to keep going? I hear keep going in this year. Okay. We also have the annual work plan afterwards to discuss. So, it's not like it's the end of the meeting yet. So let's just take a break. We've been sitting here a couple of hours. Carl? Okay. All right. So it is 9:05, so we'll come back at 9:10. All right, we are back. I realized during the break what my confusion was. I thought there were 3 only, but there were 3 items that staff asked us to look at in that particular area of the city, and now we are moving to a different area of the city, right?
I think I lumped like neighborhood business districts into one item. So
Okay.
That's Dempster, Main, Central.
Okay, all right. So we have a couple more to talk about.
Okay, so we'll move on. We'll look at some areas of the downtown, and I'll give a little background. So there's existing zoning in the downtown. Zoning designation is D2. What that area represents are really the kind of historic development patterns of the downtown that remain, that haven't been redeveloped and repurposed. Those largely exist on East Davis Street, West Davis Street, North Sherman and Orrington, and South Sherman and Orrington are largely these locations. And I'll give you one area that's representative of that. This is East Davis Street. This is the south side of Davis. This is currently zoned D2. Landmark building. And you can look on the west portion of Davis is also zoned D2. So this is it's a restrictive zoning district that tries to retain these more human-scaled historic development patterns in the downtown that haven't been redeveloped. These are examples of how zoning can be used as a companion tool for the purposes of retaining character and retaining built forms that exist. So this is kind of a 2-part question. One is the existing D2 zoning permits a height of 42 feet and a floor area ratio of 1.75. The proposed zoning, this is what translates into the existing D2, and I know it gets very confusing, but it's D1 is what they're rezoning these to. And it also has, in its purpose statement, it talks about historic fabric in these locations. So it has the same purpose that exists currently. But instead of 42 feet, what's proposed is 65 feet. And then an FAR instead of 1.75, proposed is 5 for the same.
Big jump.
So the initial question is, is that appropriate to retain some of these historic development patterns and fabric that exists currently in the downtown? And then the second part question will be there are locations that are currently zoned under this restrictive downtown designation that are proposed to be upzoned to the highest designation D3. So we'll look at that after.
Is that the current zoning?
Yeah.
Is that the current zoning for the proposed office tower at Davis and Chicago, right by the university building?
I believe this location, so the D2 jogs, and what will be D1 jogs over to capture the university building, but this lot is D3, so that's the highest designation next to it. These two buildings are also captured. This is a lovely building that would be captured under what would be D1. So this is, two-story building.
And is this also on Sherman? That includes the old varsity building and.
So that's one of the locations that we'll look at that are currently fall under this that are proposed not to.
And all of this is to get, under the umbrella to get more housing in Evanston. Is that correct or not necessarily?
I think that's one of the goals. I think one of the other goals is increasing the tax base. Supporting businesses in the downtown is something the plan talks about by adding that kind of critical mass of residential density. So it's not the only goal.
My first initial thought is that that's a very big jump to go from 1.75 to 5 FAR. But what is it? The Cedar Street Hotel, I think, is an example of where there was a 1 or 2 story street hotel, like old terracotta building that then they built a huge, like 100-foot plus hotel behind it. So I guess there could be potential of reusing an older building and then allowing for big density in the downtown. But I don't know how that would be accomplished.
Do you mean
Over the
preserving the street level facade?
They preserved the facade and part of a 2-story building.
Right.
And then it was set back.
Right.
And then there was a tower with a hotel. I guess that is an example of how we could retain but then also allow for.
What and where is that again?
I think it's the Cedar Street Hotel that's in near Rush and in Chicago.
Oh, I thought we were talking
Sorry,
about something.
I'm not talking in Evanston.
Yeah,
but
no,
as-
there are multiple examples in Chicago where they've done that, and and that's actually a pretty standard thing in preservation in some areas. To it's not exactly a facade-ectomy, as some people call it, but it's kind of a variation on that, where part of the building is retained at the street level, and then it's set back enough that it doesn't really contribute so much to the feeling of the street.
It preserves the sky from the from the sidewalk level, for instance.
Yeah, but it allows for the kind of density that is more expected in a more downtown type setting like this.
And again, I'm just going to ask a question. All the tall buildings are all PUDs in Evanston. Is that correct, or most of them?
I think many of them are, but not all of them. No, this building certainly wasn't. I don't think the Rotary was either. I think those probably predate it. But the Albion was. Sherman Plaza certainly was. I think this building likely was. I'm not sure. It's certainly before my time.
All right, so can you just go back and restate? So the idea here is that they want to go from 1.7 to 5 FAR, but also there's a height increase as well.
Yeah, the height increases from 42 to 65.
along the entire area except for a couple of specific locations.
That building right there is an excellent example. For instance, who was that building we're looking at right there? The
Chandler Building?
Chandler Building. I remember when they did that. As a matter of fact, a company that was in the incubator moved into that building and got that done in 98, 97.
That's a
That
landmark.
building
They went
was
through the Class
built
L
out to the
process.
corner, right? And they just took that down and left. That's an excellent job, I think.
There was a 2-story building here.
Yeah.
That was taken down. This is he landmarked the building in order to go after the Class L incentive to reduce the tax burden for the property, and then this meets the Secretary of Interior standards. So that's a really nice project.
So we reused
Everyone-
a building and added a park.
Exactly. But I don't know what Kay just said, but there was a process, an economic process that was applied to that in order to get
Yeah.
that to happen.
Yeah, so you for income producing properties, they can get additional tax incentives if they have landmark status. So that doesn't come up very often here because most of the stuff we look at is residential. But in this particular location, conceivably there could be some people taking advantage of that if the math works out.
But we were just looking at hub commercial hubs, where this would be the mechanism that would apply to those buildings, right?
If it has landmark status.
So it's definitely an incentive.
Right.
then.
Yeah,
it's
it's
not
an
it's not really a reaction then, because if we landmark properties in the downtown, then that opens people up to potentially getting a tax savings
Yeah.
Exactly.
and reusing the building.
But the math has to work out, the tax savings. So we have to, if it's 1.7, it might not work. But if it's something closer to 5, it might help with the incentive. This incentive. I don't know what the math is, but there's a formula for that. I mean, I'm okay with a little bit of little more density downtown. To be honest with you, more people living there, more businesses, encouraging a little bit more there. I don't know.
But
I don't love it coming all the way to the street, though. I like the idea of just
I think that's the point. That's why we're addressing it, because it's not a matter of just density. It's a matter of being attractive. It's a matter of being comfortable. It's also an economic issue in that if you build something that's kind of crappy, you're not going to get money. No one's going to want to live there. No one's going to have their business there. And there's a value in being attractive and well done. And particularly when you're talking about a cluster of buildings, you want to be able to attract people.
So I think we're at an interesting inflection point, because our downtown has had many, many, many lives and identities over its history. And we kind of need to understand, what do we want our downtown to be? Because over the last 20-something years, it's become more of a residential neighborhood as well as a commercial district for other people in the city. So do we want that to continue, that hybrid, residential neighborhood, commercial district to continue, or what? I mean, I think once we set that vision, that will help guide what the zoning should be.
the downtown right now is not served well by being something and everything. I mean, I think a clear vision would help it quite a bit. And mixed uses have been shown to work in other places. It wouldn't be a bad idea to be open to a little bit of density here. I mean, but just the sort of numbers, okay, how high can you go? What the FAR is going to be is not, I mean, in this particular location with this kind of concentration of historic buildings, with this kind of clear character and important history, we might want to be actually a little bit more specific than just your recommendation is not okay in this particular case.
Can someone help me understand tangibly what the FAR of 1.7, how it tangibly differs from 5, or what was it, 7 that's proposed?
5.
Five,
5, right?
Like
1.7 to 5.
Like, how does that really take shape? Can someone just kind of illustrate that for me verbally?
Does somebody want to take that on? Thomas, you want to?
It's just all based on lot size. So let's assume you have a 10,000 square foot lot.
Okay.
So, an FAR of 1.75 allows you to have 17,500 square feet of
Lot
habitable
cut.
space of floor area.
Okay.
Whether that it's not lot area, it's distributed
it's
amongst
total.
the stories within the building. So
Okay.
the same
Okay.
building that's 17,500 square feet under the current rules, that lot would be allowed to have 50,000 square feet of floor area. So you're able to have a building that has, more bulk, more floor area, more width to it.
Got it.
And that,
Good,
that
thank you.
potential volume is further restricted in zoning by setbacks. So like if I, like, if FAR says that you could build a 17,500 square foot building, but there are setbacks, those setbacks might make that number impossible. It has to conform to all of the zoning requirements.
The most strict.
Right.
Well, that's why we have height restrictions too.
Yeah, and very often FAR is a limiting regulation where the height might, you might be able to, the height might be 65 feet, but an FAR under 1.75, that's a very skinny building to be able to achieve that height versus that same height requirement, a building with an FAR of 5 could be much fatter.
And do you have to, for zoning, you have to adhere to the most strict
Yeah,
guidelines?
you have to conform to all of them. So if you could build a much bigger building with just the FAR, but the height or the setbacks limit it, then it's limited.
But with a higher FAR, you're more likely to go to the height limit.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
When
But
we
it
make
also with the higher FAR, it also means that you have more potential income, which then could work with the math for these incentives for the Class L and all that stuff.
Can we just say something about that there needs to be protection for the height at the street, because we've been talking about that.
Mm-hmm. Good.
I mean that, and then we would be open. We don't think that that the character of the neighborhood would be negatively impacted by more density in this location, as long as the street level is protected. Does everyone?
I have a question.
feeling- Sure.
Is that Davis corridor west of the tracks? So what is that? I don't know. West over to, say, Ridge. Is that the same zoning as this other area we're talking about on Davis? Like this?
Like where Benison's is?
Yeah,
Like is this corridor here? Yeah, right, from Ridge.
This is all the same. What would be D1, what's currently D2. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So-
So
so-
I personally think, this corridor, I don't know what others think, but I think it could be zoned differently than the other part. It's like separated by the tracks, first of all, so there is kind of a dividing line. And it is much smaller and human scale at the moment, which, I don't know, this is actually a pretty vibrant corridor, I think. Would like to see it remain, like continue with that character. And a lot of the legacy businesses also sit here with the hardware store and Benison's and some others. So maybe, I don't know if we want to talk about this being slightly different than those other areas we're talking about.
There is something actually in the draft zoning code, and I don't know whether it's for this area specifically, that talks about downtown areas that are adjacent to historic areas or residential areas being sort of having that taken into account, right? Is
I
that
think that's
this?
only in the university district.
Only in the
That
university
talk about
district.
context.
Context.
Okay.
So we could perhaps suggest that the same kind of language and mindset be applied here. The other thing, if I understand you correctly, is that we could have east of the tracks could have slightly higher FAR and height, and west of the tracks slightly lower FAR and height. Is that where you
Yes.
were headed with your
Yeah, I
comments?
was.
All right. And
I have a
you
real-
were going to say something.
Yeah, I have a real problem with this area. I've got a problem with a lot of areas, but this area is a very stable, successful area. Lemoy's been there for how long? 100 years or something? And so, I don't understand why they're asking us to help them to kind of destroy a successful community of buildings and businesses that have been doing just fine. We just need to leave them alone. It's a beautiful area. Evidently, there's an economic balance here. And what I mean is that the businesses are successful enough to successfully sustain their business, pay their taxes. Why do we want to mess that up?
So you're suggesting keeping the existing zoning?
I'm suggesting if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And because it seems that those people are, whoever owns Lemoy Hardware is doing just fine. We want to displace their successful economic situation to provide an opportunity for someone else to make money off of that space. And I don't care if it's the builder, I don't care if it's the landlord, I don't care if it's the city who wants more revenue or something. So I think that we should, because, preservation, that's our interest, right? Those buildings probably visually are the right building for the right spot for the right time. And we should not try to find a way to turn that around. Because I feel that's what we're kind of doing. We're trying to come up with something to displace them or something because we've been asked to do that. But I'm just saying, it just seems they're doing just fine. We should leave them alone.
It's currently zoned higher, right? And just nobody has taken advantage of it?
Well, do we have the option of recommending that there be no zoning change to areas that are thriving economically?
Right.
Well,
Or
At least,
protective
25
zoning.
So I was just asking,
time.
if we say no zoning change, it still may encourage changes. So I was asking Cade what the actual existing zoning.
This is a very restrictive zoning
Okay.
district. I think the only building that I know of that's been built within it is, and it's hard to see because of these trees, is this right here. So this is the product that you would get essentially
With the
under
current
the
zone.
current zone.
All right. Beth, I think you've been waiting to say something. You were trying to talk earlier.
Oh, no, I was just going to request, can you show the zoning map, the current and proposed, the side by side of this little corridor? Thank you.
And then can you move over a little bit to the west side where we were talking about? So on the left, the sort of lightest blue is very restrictive.
Left is existing, so this,
Right, so
where it
that's
says
the really-
D2, this light blue, not the lightest on the other side.
Right.
This is the most restrictive
And
currently.
is it still the most restrictive on the other side, but with a little bit compared to everything else around it?
It's the same zoning designation on the west and east side.
No, I mean in the proposed, is it still compared to its surroundings the most restricted?
Yes, by far.
All right.
So it's upzoned from existing, but is certainly more restrictive than the rest of the downtown as proposed.
So they're already kind of taking it into account. The question is whether we are happy with that.
I think
Lisa,
we
I think you've been trying to talk.
Yeah, so it seems to me, if I'm Right, the tracks, which you said is a great barrier from one side to the other. I think there's probably 3 high-rises west of the tracks on Elmwood. There's a newer building anyway. And so I think that's a great barrier from one zone to the other, and they should use that as a natural break. The other thing I'd be concerned about is the post office. It's a huge lot.
It
That's
looks
a GSA property though, right?
yeah.
It's a local landmark as well.
Okay, I'm just saying that.
Yeah, but I think all federal, it's owned by the federal government, so they have their own process. But in any case, I was trying to get at what we're looking at. So west of the tracks, so in the proposed west of the tracks is more restricted than everything else, but it still allows for more than it currently does, right? So what is the proposed again?
65 feet FAR of 5 versus existing, which is 42 FAR of 1.75.
So it's current on that side of the tracks. You can currently do 45 feet.
The FAR is the limiting factor there, 1.75. I don't think you could achieve the 42 feet of height with a FAR of 1.7.
I mean, I think can we all agree that this is increasing the FAR by a factor of 3. There's the potential for redevelopment that would mean the destruction of the existing character, and we could just say we don't like it, move on.
Yeah, we could. I just was trying to figure out what put some thought around, some parentheses around that. So that's fine. We can say we don't like it, but we can
Well, it doesn't.
also.
It just to our mission. It seems like it's likely to result in the character of the area. Result in the destruction of the character of the area.
Yeah, but when we have in this particular case, we could tell them to be more specific and say, you know what, the current 1.7 FAR really is appropriate in this place. Instead of saying 5 is bad in this particular location, we could say 1.7 really is what it should be.
Yeah, and the height. I think I agree with Charles. Like, if it ain't broke, I mean, this is a very. I live over here. I'm actually over there all the time, but it's very vibrant. Restaurants, other Lemoy, just a ton of them. Benison's, obviously, yeah.
I in like west of Chicago Avenue, the conversation we were having earlier, I was okay to say what you're proposing we don't think is good. But in this particular location with the concentration of character and stuff, I'd be happy to just say, stay with 1.7.
Keep it as is.
Yep.
Second that.
Okay. So if everyone's all right with that, I'm getting a nods from the other side. So then on the east side of the tracks, though, were we also being asked to comment on that?
I think it's all, and you're free to identify places that are rich in character that you.
No, I just wanted to make sure we were addressing
it's the same.
everything.
Yeah, it's the same designation. The locations that are currently zoned D2 are what the question is, because its purpose is to retain historic character within the downtown. So is the historic character capable of being retained with the increase that's proposed, I think is the question.
Yeah, but we were all talking about the fact that on the west side of the tracks was a slightly different situation. So now perhaps we should go to the east side of the tracks and think about whether 1.7 to 5 is, or 1.7 to something that is a little higher than 1.7 might be okay.
I think what's happening is that we're losing sight that there is a current zoning overlay of traditional downtown zone, like areas, right? If I'm correct, and that those zoning overlays are gone, and that's then now being proposed in this new zoning type, right? D1, and so is that zoning overlay protection? Do we see that in this new zoning?
Right.
And so I think we just need to make sure that what we like in the current zoning overlay is in the new proposed, because all zoning overlays are gone in the proposed, right?
And it's not an overlay; it's just a separate district in the downtown.
Sure.
But yeah, it's.
So in this particular case, it is, it's 1.7 on this side of the tracks as well, proposed 5, right? All the way to the other side of Chicago Avenue, to the alley. So how do we feel about that? That's now getting into an area that has existing buildings that are a little bit taller. And it's a little bit more adjacent to the downtown, and it's kind of,
I mean, there is that one block that we were shown west of Chicago that includes all those storefronts with rental above, and I don't know. I mean, did I say west? I meant east. Where the Giordano's building is going east towards Hinman. That is now all in the catchment of this proposed zoning to kind of mirror the building that's at the corner of Hinman and Davis. I guess it would be what we would see moving west, right?
if we had an
in
FAR.
height, right?
Let's go, can you go back to that, Kate? To the Hinman? To the other side? Just turn around. Or the alley. It goes to the alley between Hinman and David and Chicago, right? Right here. Yeah, that's what we were asking.
It's this building right there, the 500. Is that
This building is not Zone D2.
right? But what is that? The height that would be under the new proposed zoning?
65.
Slightly higher.
65.
A story higher, probably.
So that's my point, is that small scale commercial west of the alley would be could be similar to what is currently at the corner of Hinman and Davis.
Except the hope is to protect retain what's at the street level and have it set back a little bit.
Just to be clear, though, that's not are we recommending that that's a requirement? That they maintain the facade? There's no reason why someone would necessarily do that.
No, I know, but I think we were talking about some sort of protection for the street feeling of the
I think the question, at least for me, the question that should be answered is what's proposed, does it protect these types of resources in the way that it's intended to currently?
I don't
Or
think so.
does it threaten these resources?
Yeah, I mean, it's really a question for developers, right? Because if they say, yeah, that becomes profitable for me with an FAR of 5, then it does. None of us are developers, but
Yeah, that's why I keep talking about the math, because it's the incentive.
right. So I guess I think our instinct is no, because it seems so much larger that it seems like there's going to be an incentive to destroy something we want to keep.
I think that's the point. The point is we're not developers. We're protectors. We're protecting this against developers because developers have, their motivation is profit, which is I don't have a problem with profit. Our motivation and responsibility is to protect an asset, a community asset. And for me, an asset is driving down the street and seeing the nice buildings and the scroll and stuff. And that's what zoning is, and that really is what zoning is about, is that balance between all these other interests and so I think that not every streetscape is should be preserved against everything else, but some are, and so we just need to have the vision to select the ones that are, but there are so many mechanisms to help in this battle. So But I like the visual of Evanston, so I'm kind of.
I think that we need to assume that there is going to be change and try to guide it. Yeah. So it's protecting it, but also enabling some change is, I think, what we're doing here. Lisa, did you want to?
Yeah, so if they were to keep it exactly as it is, zoning, and I'm a developer and I want to build a 25-story building for housing, to create more housing, I would just use the mechanisms within the city to do that, right? I'd do a PUD and I'd build it, right? I mean, I would try to build it.
I think there's a conversation, right, with the city. They're going to sit down with them. There's going to be some negotiations about what it's going to, I mean, no one wants to build an ugly building.
So my point is, why are we changing the zoning if there's kind of mechanisms in place to do something beyond the zoning now to get what they want?
So my understanding of that is that they don't want to have to go through the PUD process for every single thing. So to sort of signal that the downtown can be built out a little bit.
But don't we get better buildings by them going through the process?
I don't know.
I
Maybe.
get what you're saying, and I think that's also why we proposed this urban design commission,
Right.
was that they were going to be the ones that kind of set the vision and aesthetic of what it means to be in downtown Evanston. And then hopefully that sets the tone and design guidelines for developments. But you're right. I mean, I guess there is an iterative process of going through a process, and coming to a group and the Land Use Commission is they're tasked with reading the comprehensive plan and making sure that the plan development is accomplishing what the comprehensive plan has set out as a goal. That's my understanding of the process. And I think that is a valid process. I mean, do we want everything that we're talking about tonight to be as of right and just, get
Because by doing a plan unit development, you get the community involved and feedback and everything else, which is what we're trying to do through zoning, kind of like, oh, well, we like this street, let's not touch this street. And by making zoning bigger, we're allowing things that we are not perceiving maybe.
Right.
By changing the zoning, we're not going block by block and seeing how it will be affected. We're giving all of downtown is now a C2 or whatever it is. And I think it's dangerous, I guess, is my.
To increase
To increase anything at this point without going block by block, building by building. That's not what they're asking us to do. I understand that. But, I mean, there's, 15 high rises now in downtown Evanston, I'd say. I don't know. And they're kind of scattered. Do we want them to be next to each other? It's going to change the feeling of downtown, all that kind of stuff. I guess my point is, I think what they're asking us to do with, especially downtown, is bigger than what we have the capability of doing, of reviewing it.
It seems to me like economic development as a group, economic development department, they are the accelerator. They're the gas. And I think we are the brake. You can't, when you're driving a car, you got to have both of them have to work in order to get to where you're going to get to. And so I think it's appropriate for us to try to, be the brake. And I mean, I've always admired all you guys for your ability to see the beauty in the buildings and stuff like that. And, that's our task.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to, in an ideal world, we're not so much the break as much as we are just kind of the qualitative force making it better and not stopping it. Yeah. Yeah, but I do think we have to be careful not to,
I think she wants us to be a little bit more of the steering wheel.
right, right, more of the steering wheel and not so much, but in any case, if we feel like this particular question that staff has put to us is not really something that we can comment on in the way in which it has been presented to us, then we should say that.
I think it's simply answer the question. Yes, it does add development pressure to these blocks, but the question is, how do we manage that pressure?
Well, I don't know that,
right?
I don't know that this,
Is that what-
I don't know that the specific, I don't know it needs to be that specific. I think that I've heard a tremendous amount of feedback about a desire to be more strategic, to respect context, to appreciate buildings that already meet some of the goals that we're setting out, and to not,
Time and again, this idea of the Urban Design Commission keeps coming up as a way to help negotiate these issues, which we are struggling without it. So that might be part of our recommendation to them, is to just highlight what we've already said.
I just don't want you to sell yourself short. I think that you've given a tremendous amount of feedback.
Yeah.
I don't think that the feedback needs to be very specific about exactly what you want to see, exactly which locations or this or that.
Well, yeah, I mean, if we're saying, if somebody is saying to us, well, it's 1.7 now, if we go up to 5, is that going to be a problem? I mean, we can't say to them, well, if you do it 3, it's okay. That's not I think that's what we're saying. We can't provide that kind of
And I don't think
feedback.
they're asking. I think what I'm saying is that's not the feedback that is really being sought.
Then I'm comfortable with the feedback we've given and moving on to the next piece. Has everyone got consensus on that? All right, let's keep moving.
And we can also put a bookmark in this. It doesn't have to, there's also no deadline necessarily for this. We can pick up where we left off if we think that
I think,
this is a good stopping place.
I mean, if you said that there was one more piece to this in terms of specific locations.
There's another question specifically in the downtown is.
But that's the last one, Cade, and that was presented to us for tonight.
No, and then there's one more.
Can I ask a
As
question?
well. So
It's 10 o'clock, and
Right.
I'm looking at the agenda, and the last item looks like it could be very lengthy. I'm not sure what's intended. I'm just curious what the plan is for the meeting tonight.
Right, that's what I was trying to figure out.
I think that was my point.
What else was? I mean, I don't want to cut off the discussion about the zoning code unless you all are comfortable leaving some of this other stuff on for another agenda. Because this is something that people are watching, and we.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying we cut it off. I'm just wondering, like, practically, keeping in mind what my bedtime is.
No.
Like how late we're planning to go. I was just asking the question.
Well, the work plan conversation actually could be relatively short because we're not voting on anything tonight. It's just a kind of discussion, so we can keep that short. But I was not clear on what the scope of this zoning code conversation was, so that's what I was trying to get from Cade. So there's one more or two more things to discuss.
I think there are other locations in the downtown, and then the last piece of the kind of neighborhood business districts that we haven't touched on is Central Street to the north.
Okay, so that seems like kind of a big.
Can I ask that we postpone the Central Street to another meeting?
Yeah.
Because I think that could be a whole nother
Right.
comprehensive.
I'd be comfortable just stopping right now with this 2045 stuff and go on and take it up again. It's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think in order to give it the attention it needs, we should get through it. So next meeting, special meeting, I would even do that. But
Well, the special meeting will be up to the, for the future. We don't know when the Land Use Commission necessarily is going to take up the zoning code, because they're still actually supposed to be, because it's been separated. So, we can just move. It's fine with me if we move on. I didn't realize that there was that much to discuss. So if everyone is okay and comfortable with having the conversation we've had tonight about zoning code, we can go on
But
to the
Kate,
next
can you
one.
just give us a heads up of what we'll be talking about for the next 2 units of discussion on the zoning code? So we can think about it?
So I think there's a few things. There's a few locations in the downtown that are currently zone D2, which would be D1, which we were just talking about, that are proposed to be zone D3, which is the highest. And then there are 2 specific locations that involve landmarks, one being the copycat building being zone D3, so that's the highest. Currently, it's, I think, a resident, maybe I don't know what that's zoned now, but it's much more restrictive. And then the others is a historic district, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which is currently zoned R6 maybe, which is proposed to be zoned D3, which is the highest.
So what is copycat currently?
I can look that up for you. I wrote it down.
Right, that's the building that's.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, so that you said is becoming D3?
It's currently D2, which is what we were just talking about. That's that more restrictive protective zoning designation. It's proposed D3, which is the highest zoning designation, which is a, let me just make sure I look it up.
So both of those are becoming D3. All right.
So we'll talk about these next.
Yeah,
Next
and D3 is no height restriction, floor area ratio of 9. And then that's also the same condition proposed for the, oh my gosh, let me orient myself. Here for this is the Women's Christian Temperance Union, currently zoned R4, proposed for D2, which is 135 feet, FAR of 7.
Are those
Yeah, I
national
think-
landmarks?
And those are National Historic Landmarks, yeah.
All right, so these are, and then there was some stuff about Central Street. So
And then I think we should look at Central Street.
Right. So I think we can, if we're all comfortable, I hate to shut down any conversation, but if we're all saying it's 10 o'clock and we're comfortable with what we've talked about, we can move on. In that case, we'll go to the 2025 annual work plan. We have this plan draft that Cade offered to us. So the annual work plan, every January we talk about it, and then remind me, in February we vote on it, right?
Yeah, there's no like statutory requirement for that, so whenever you're ready to vote on it, but I think that has been the practice.
So it's just, various things that we feel are important, coming from the Preserve 2040 and so on. We had a few things last year that we achieved, a few things that we didn't, so those could be pulled onto 2025, or we could shift gears and look at something else. Since I'm not going to be chair in 2025, I don't want to guide too much of this conversation. But in any case, we can talk as little or as much about this as we want tonight. If there's things that some of you feel very strongly about that should be on our 2025 annual work plan, you're welcome to speak up now.
I'd love to see another effort of getting the commission to do some assessments. Like another couple of sessions like that we did. Was that 2023? Yeah.
Yeah,
right?
I think so.
I'd love to see
Survey
that
work,
put
you
on the
mean?
calendar. Yeah.
Like survey work, yeah.
Yeah. And maybe in some of these areas that we're talking about, the corridors, the business, the downtowns, the commercial areas here.
Just for the record, I'm not that, I don't love the idea of survey work when we have so many other things to do that might have a little bit more bearing on the social justice or climate resilience or things like that. But that's just I'm just sharing my thoughts that we have limited volunteer time. And so sometimes surveying can be really fun, but it takes a lot of effort. So it's just something to keep in mind, to maybe be very strategic. If we were to do survey, personally, I would love to do it more thematically, potentially highlight some gaps in our lists. For instance, in my time on the commission, I haven't seen any buildings yet come to us that were designed by women. So that might be a kind of survey that we could do that would be worth our time. I'm not saying that on the ground in-person surveying is not important. If you guys want to do that, you're welcome to do it. I mean, obviously, but
Yeah, well, the other thing to consider is, instead of having all of us on the commission like pounding the pavement and doing the survey work ourselves, Evanston is a certified local government, and we could apply for a grant through that program to do the survey work. It was done historically. We've done this as a city to resurvey the Lakeshore Historic District. So if we applied for a grant to look for gaps in our historic districts or landmarks, I'm pretty sure that that's something that the State Historic Preservation Office would like to support. And that way it deals with volunteer capital and all that.
yeah. And just as a reminder, since he brought up volunteer stuff, one of the reasons why I decided I did not want to be chair again is because I wanted to have a little bit more time to focus on the volunteer core idea that I proposed to you guys last time that I haven't been able to really develop because I've been doing this stuff. So if I had the opportunity, when I have the opportunity now, not if, to turn my attention back to that, there might be some members of the public who could help with some of the surveying that you guys wanted to do, so that our volunteer capital could be attended to other things like writing grants to do larger visions. That's just, just as a reminder that hasn't, just because we haven't talked about that in a couple of months doesn't mean it has gone away. It's just that I was eager to keep working on that and I didn't have the time and resources to do it. So anyway, that's
Well, can I add something I'd like to see us take on, and that is recognition for some kind of Black identity in Evanston that needs to be brought forward. I've seen all of the big landmarks in Evanston, the Butler Building, some other things, the Hill Hospital, all those things disappear. They're never coming back. We have an organization that I think we could maybe help write a grant to do that. Shorefront. I think they're a historic group, and they're a historic preservation group, and we should maybe try and find an alliance with those guys to identify either. And I want to see us pursue the idea of a preservation district in the
neighborhood conservation district.
Neighborhood conservation district in the Fifth Ward. We have. It's something that's critical and missing from our history and mission.
Yeah, and I talked about buildings designed by women, and I currently know of not a single one that's landmarked in Evanston. I'm sure there must be, but they haven't really come up in front of us yet. But similarly, I haven't seen very many or any really designed by Black architects. You know that there were Black architects.
We did one. We did one. The one was the garage. Remember that we wanted to move the.
Oh, there was one.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I take that back. There was one.
Yeah.
I mean, so what I'm saying is we know that there were Black architects. We know that there were women architects. Right. It's just that we have X number of however many thousands of buildings that are landmarks here, and the math doesn't work out. Doesn't reflect the reality that we know existed at the time. So that's what I was trying to get at. But just as a reminder, also in addition to the volunteer corps, you guys might remember that I was also trying to get the consortium back together. Do you guys remember that whole thing too? So that would be an opportunity to collaborate with Shorefront and to put Shorefront in the way of other members of the community who might want to collaborate with them, sort of facilitate that networking a little bit more. Not that they necessarily need help networking, but it's an opportunity that we could provide. So there's that. There's other things on the study list too. On the work plan, and one that came up tonight is the annual study list of eligible resources, which I do feel like it keeps coming up, and I feel like maybe we might want to do something about that. I know I said a few minutes ago I didn't want a guide, but I do want to point that out, that that's something that's on our list, and it came up a couple times tonight, and I'm wondering if you guys would like to consider doing that, discussing that in February, because that seems really important.
Yeah, I would like to see us identify a couple like top priority buildings on that list that we want to actually landmark in the year. Like identify some that we think are particularly important, especially in light of all this new zoning, and like try to see if there's a way to get those landmarked. And then, and then the other thing I was going to mention on another topic is the educate. I was telling some y'all I just went through the property tax freeze process, so I understand it a lot better than I used to. And I was talking to the SHPO people in Illinois or in the downstate, and they were saying that like Geneva does an excellent job. Apparently they have a ton of Geneva properties that get this tax freeze, like relative to other communities. And so I'm not sure what Geneva's doing. I don't know like what the secret sauce is, but I would be interested to find out what other communities are doing to get the word out or to encourage residents to apply, and then see if there's like a best practice we could apply to our community that, or some tactics that might work here.
I think what you were saying, that if we were going to prepare to have buildings listed as a landmark, we need to start doing a better job of educating city council of what it means to be a landmark and the benefits of becoming a landmark. Because I guess the last time the city council saw a proposed landmark from the commission, it was like unanimously voted down, I think, right? The church on Heard.
Yeah, it was.
And I think
Tom Suffer did.
Okay, well, there was
So
maybe
it was-
one vote,
yeah.
but I feel like, I wouldn't want us to put all that effort into trying to prepare, this presentation, like potential landmark, and then have a city council that's not really sympathetic to it and vote it down, because then it becomes another hurdle in the future to maybe even re-landmark that, go through the process of maybe trying to get it landmarked again, if possible. I mean,
That's something this is something we've talked about a couple times. I'm looking at it here under Education and Advocacy 4.4, preservation training. It's and one-on-one orientation with elected officials. It's something that we definitely have the capacity on this commission to do. I've been doing a little bit of it myself. But we could take that on as a specific annual work plan item if we decided we wanted to make that.
I think it would be definitely worth the time to have regular articles in the roundtable about topics like this. And because you don't break a rock with one blow, as they say, and city council, they're elected. And I think I'm totally ignorant about this stuff. What the heck? What am I saying? I think that it's just like I do with the gardening stuff. It's like, it's like one person at a time to educate the whole town.
Other thoughts on the annual work plan? It's just a discussion tonight, and then you can take it up next time. Sort of let some of this stuff roll around in your brain. Thomas, you haven't spoken up at all about the annual work plan. Did you have any thoughts you wanted to add tonight?
I can mention, I think the deconstruction ordinance, I haven't heard from Council Member Newsma. I don't know if there's any momentum for that anywhere. I had a good conversation. I shared my notes with Cade, with Emily Friedman in Boulder. I've tried to get in touch with Stephanie Phillips in San Antonio. They have their deconstruction ordinance kind of located in the preservation office. So it's maybe interesting. They're a much bigger town. So, I mean, I'm still working on that. So that's something that I'd like to see us continue with.
The Land Use Commission had a pretty surprisingly in-depth conversation about the deconstruction ordinance when I was here. Was that last week, guys? On Wednesday, when I did the presentation, when I presented to them, and they hooked on to that and talked about it for a little bit. So you might be interested in watching that part of the video if you haven't already.
It has, the Rebuilders Warehouse. They got a huge grant, you know that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they have really expanded their activities. And they are connected with the group in Chicago.
Yeah.
They're the people to drive this and carry this. I don't know why, they would
Right.
write down their thing.
Right. So she was here, Ana Gutierrez, the executive director, a few years ago now, when we started the speaker series. We've talked to her a couple of times since then. Some of these you all will remember in the implementation chapter in Preserve 2040. It wasn't like these are the things we all have to do. It's just the items that like we are going to do ourselves. It's just the items that are going to be the priority for us, and then we can sort of collaborate with others to have it get done. One of the things about the consortium is that in my vision of it anyway, that I proposed to you in May of last year, everybody, that was when I stood in front of you guys and talked about it, was that it could have a bigger umbrella, and that organizations like Rebuilding Warehouse, which might not have been included in the consortium in a previous era, could be included now. So that's another opportunity especially if it's a priority, like a clear stated priority of the Preservation Commission, that could help to sort of facilitate some of that conversation. It was the deconstruction ordinance was on our work plan for 2024. So, we're working on it. We're all volunteers. If we were all full-time staff, we could get it all done, but we're not. So anyway, do you all feel comfortable with this conversation about the work plan, and we can say goodnight? Okay. All right. Anything else? All right. We're going to adjourn. It is 10:18. Thank you very much.